Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to perhaps the first in a series of conversations with the airport manager. I'm Warren Hendrickson. I am the airport senior manager for Olympia Regional Airport and an employee of the Port of Olympia. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Joe Downing, who has gladly welcomed us with his presence. And Commissioner Downing, if you'd like to take a few moments to say hello, please do.
Thank you, Warren. Can you hear me? I'm standing up to keep it casual, but I'm also talking for the record. And my name is Joe Downing. I'm Port Commissioner in District 1. I've been Port Commissioner for just over 7 years. And I'm happy that Warren has agreed to take the time for a Q&A session for the public. I see some familiar faces. I also see a bunch of new faces. So I want to thank you for coming down to our humble meeting room here. And, I think that it's let's look at the bright side. It's a happy coincidence that we have this entity called CAC. C-A-C-C stands for
Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission.
So we have the CAC thank you, Warren. So we have the CAC at work. About the same time, we're working on our airport master plan, which we do every 10 years. And so I'm sure Warren can field any question, but he's here to talk about the airport master plan, which is kind of a regular piece of business for the Port of Olympia in our management of the Olympia Airport. We also have Derek Murata here helping us. He's a consultant working with Warren to move this airport master plan forward. So again, I thank you for coming tonight, and anytime the Port can interface with the public and create transparency and answer questions, we're happy to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to just take a few words just to go ahead and set the stage and the tone for tonight, and I want to talk, and mostly I just want to get this conversation rolling. Tonight is a very informal operation. I would prefer to just be sitting down in front or standing, but given that we're running a hybrid meeting with Zoom, it's important to be on the microphone and to be in a place where the people that are dialing in online can see us. So a couple of brief words. First off, I've been at the Port of Olympia since last July, so I've just completing my 7th month here. I'm thrilled to be here, glad to be here at this airport. Most recently, I was the airport director of airport operations and industrial relations at the Port of Bremerton National Airport, and then moved down here. My background is I've been in aviation for 5 decades plus, and I just can't get away from it. I've used enough runways in my time that being an airport manager gives me an opportunity to kind of pay back all the good opportunities I've had for flying. I would also like to mention that not only am I the airport senior manager for Olympia Regional Airport, but I also wear a separate hat, completely different from my day job, and that is I am also the acting chair of the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission. I came into that role about 3 years ago when the funding and the legislation was created for this commission, and I was the vice chair as a non-voting member, and then the actual chair went and retired on me on the 1st of December from public service, and all of a sudden I found myself in this role of being the chair. So I had a lot of opportunity for public engagement, community engagement in that role, and we can happily go in that direction too if the attendees would like to. I did mention that we are both in person as well as hybrid, so we'll make ourselves available periodically as we go through the questions and answers. I will alternate between in-person and Zoom just to give everybody a fair chance. I also do want to mention, how did this meeting happen? I attended a meeting of the Stop Olympia Airport Growth in November, and one of the questions that came from the audience during that meeting is, why doesn't the Port hold an open-ended question and answer session? And it was like, well, that's simple. We can, and we are. And so promise made, promise kept, and that's the way I like to operate. So I'm pleased that everybody came tonight, and like I said, this could be the first in a series. A few things, nothing is off limits tonight. Whatever we want to talk about, we can talk about. Airport, master plan update, the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, all of that is great. My hopes for this evening are simply that we learn from each other. And I don't think that we'll always agree. We will not necessarily reach the same substantive judgments with regard to it, but if we have a common understanding of the facts and the information, then we have made some headway. And at least to establish a level of communication, respect for each other's opinion, and your input is so very, very valuable. And I treasure the fact that everyone is attending here this evening. I do have to mention a couple of logistics, of course, since we are in a public meeting. Emergency exits, we have two doors, the door you came in from plus this side door over here. You might have to just push on the bar to open this door. Restrooms are to your left down the hallway. The microphones are all hot. I will ask that if you ask a question, just for the benefit of those that are online, that you do use the podium to ask your question. That would be very helpful. The meeting is being recorded, so that way we'll have it available for those that are not able to attend either online or in person tonight, and so we'll make that available via a link on our website. I may take notes periodically, just so that I can, if I have an IOU or something that comes up, so please understand that that's the case there, just for future reference, so I have my own little take-home and homework list at the end of the day. If you are somewhat shy, or we run out of time, or you just have a question that you would like to just get an answer to later, on the back table where the globe sits are forms where you can write your question down. Every question asked will get an answer. Just write your name and your email address clearly. I have some business cards back there, and even if you don't want to write your question down, you want to call me separately, my phone numbers are on my business cards, and you can call me at any time. There is no need to sign in tonight. There is no need to introduce yourself. You can be, we're going to run this differently than we run our public comment sessions during the Port Commission meetings. By the same token, for those of you that are online, if you raise your hand for a question, we will need to call on you by name, only so that we identify the person that we're unmuting to go ahead and bring your question forward. But other than that, no names are necessary unless you wish to do so. There is no time limit. We don't have the 3-minute clock running, but we will have to police ourselves so that the more people that get a chance to speak and to ask a question, then the more participation we get. So that would be wonderful. So if the questions get tough, I may call a friend. So online, we also have not only Darren here to help, and I won't promise I'll be able to answer every question, but I'll do my very best. And I'm the first one to say, if I don't know the answer, I will say I don't know. But I will look it up and get back to you. Also online with us tonight is Leah Whitfield. She is the project manager for the Airport Master Plan update. She could not be here in person this evening, but she will undoubtedly enlighten us with additional information from her level of expertise. Without the engineering consultants and the engineering services that the port uses, it would be very difficult to accomplish much. So we're very dependent and very thankful for their participation. And with that, whoever would like to go first, please come to the podium and ask your question, and we'll get this underway.
Hi, as you know, Sharon Koontz. Thank you for doing this. Somebody said you were a brave man. I don't think you're going to be turned on, so I think it's just fine. But I'm speaking as an individual, though I'm also a member of the Stop Olympia Airport Growth Group that you alluded to earlier. And I'd like to address the Airport Master Plan, which sets out proposals in the layout, as you see over there, for big changes in our airport. There's continuing confusion about the numbers of takeoffs and landings that would be possible should that master plan be implemented. And I have a little beef with you, Warren, from a recent article in the Jolt. Port staff rejected claims that the airport master plan under development would be used to increase operations, the term that encompasses airport takeoffs and landings. We've been saying, I hope we've been saying it clearly, that the update could, not would, allow for 630 operations per day. We know that many operations won't come immediately, if they ever do come. However, we also know that they could come, in fact, and sooner than discussed by port staff. From the Jolt again, Airport Senior Manager Warren Hendrickson told the Jolt that they are still searching where the protesters might have got that 630 figure.
I found it.
That one kind of irked me, since we'd had a conversation a couple weeks before that about the master plan and that it was in there. But a reader in a hurry stops there and they think, well, the protesters know nothing, obviously. But then you explained that an airport such as ours could typically accommodate 630 to 670 operations a day. And again, that kind of gives me a moment. That verifies what we said. Yet by starting your quote with, I don't know where they got that figure sort of comment, that kind of discredits us a little bit. You establish a tone that gives the impression of us having said something odd or wrong. So I hope that you'll change that tactic if it was a tactic or an accident. Just be aware of it. At least you can then later use figures. At least you later then did use figures to show that we're correct, which I really appreciated. But you never said that aloud. So is 630 operation anyone's goal? We don't know. We do know that we have reason to be alarmed, however, given the current insistence from the state that regional airports will have to pick up some of the SeaTac overflow. And I've heard our commissioners refer to that. So at the port meeting after I'd left, the Jolt reported that Commissioner Evans Harding then asked about an earlier statement I'd made that night, quote, "If you take the money for the update as it's written and you make changes that will allow for more air traffic, the FAA can force the airport to accept planes as soon as those changes are made." That's how they quoted me. And then I pointed out that the staff promises that we wouldn't start increasing air traffic until a certain year in the future would be basically worthless, because accepting the grant money comes with obligations, as you know, to the FAA. And I said, and we lose local control. Your next statement quoted in the Jolt made it seem as if I were totally wrong about losing local control. You said, quote, well, no, I'm quoting the Jolt, not you. And I know that's sometimes a difference from experience with newspapers. But he said that the port will continue to have direct control of the airport. Quote, "The FAA cannot impose anything upon us that we are not willing to accept, comma, other than the promises that we agree to when we accept federal money," which is exactly what I had said. You know, once you do that, once you accept those grant monies, you can be under their control. So again, you validated what I said, but in a very roundabout way that would have had a casual or quick reader wondering if my statement were accurate. Someone sees the first sentence, "The FAA cannot impose anything on us that we're not willing to accept," and they think, cool, I'm not going to keep reading, I'm done here. Those people who read quickly. I hope you'll not use that tactic again. In an informed democracy, it's imperative that the public be well informed. To fail to keep us informed is to fail your mandate as a public agency. So my question to you is, you thought I'd never ask, my question to you is, when will the public and the commissioners get a complete explanation and open discussion of all the obligations, or promises as you called them in the article, that come with acceptance of grant money for this airport master plan? And if you can't answer that question, would you please commit to letting us know when we can learn about those grant obligations and how? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Jolt article. I had a lengthy conversation with Danny Stusser, and I trust I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. There was no tactic involved in any of that. There really wasn't. It was the information that was quoted to me that I had read about on social media was attributing 630 flights a day to Olympia's plans. And Danny asked me where that number came from. The information that had come to me is that that was a number that was contained within the existing airport master plan update. So since I came here in July, I have been working that update. I was not familiar with that number anywhere within the airport master plan update or in the FAQs. I even reached out to our engineering team to ask where within the ongoing update is that number. We came up empty. And at that point, that's when I was asked the question by Mr. Stusser about what the source document for that 630 was. At the time, I had not found it. I continued to pore over all airport documents that evening, and that evening I did in fact find it not in anything with regard to the current master plan update, but in the 2013 master plan update. No reference had been provided to me before that point. I did see in the comment section a reference to it in that article, but by then I had already found it, and that was subsequent to the interview. So once I found that number, it's called the ASV. It's the annual service volume. So when we talk about that in terms of a master plan update or capacity of an airport, that number is based upon the number of runways and the capability of the airport. Is it an instrument-capable airport, in other words, where you can land in inclement weather or reduced visibility or lower overcast skies? Is it also one that is lighted and capable of nighttime operations? So the end result is any runway that has a 24/7 capability is capable of 26 to 28 operations. An operation is a takeoff and landing per hour. And when you multiply that out, that comes out to 630 flights a day. So the end result is any single runway airport in the country with lights and instrument approaches has that number as its capacity.
Can I add one detail?
Sure.
When you and I spoke a few weeks before that, what I said was, according to the master plan, the current one, meaning the 2013 that we're still operating on, not the new update that we're looking at, said that there were 230 operations, 230,000 operations a year here would be possible with some slight changes, tweaks to the exit runways. And so, I'm sorry, taxiway exit system. Sorry, let me get the
Runway
terminology
taxiway
correct.
configuration
Yes,
is the
and
term.
the exit system in particular. So I asked you about that in our phone call a while back, and I said, is that part of the update? And you said, yes, it was. So that's what triggered that with us, is we did check our facts, obviously, and we were concerned about that figure. So that's all, because there is, at least as I understand it, there's an option to change those, or not an option, that's part of the master plan. They will be changing those exit runway systems.
Yes and no. Let me come back to that one and explain a little bit on that one. So with regard to the conversation that we had, when you referred to the current master plan, my fault. I assumed we were talking about the ongoing master plan update, not the 2013 plan. That's a number that has been in the documents for over 10 years. So I was concentrating on current day-to-day work, not, the document that is currently on the books. So if I misinterpreted that comment, that's on me. And so the key, though, is the capacity of the airport is 630 flights a day. That's takeoffs and landings, operations total. So where are we today? The latest air traffic control data, given that we only operate the tower 12 hours a day, so there is a little bit of an estimate to the nighttime hours, is we are at 209 flights a day. The forecast period shows that by 2040, we will reach 232. So if you go back to that paragraph in the 2013 master plan that does address 630 flights a day, it says two additional things. That when you get to, and that 630 flights a day is a daily number, so it's easy to mix apples and oranges in terms of daily versus annual, but we're just going to stay on the daily number. So that paragraph where the 630 comes from, and it's also directly in the 2013 master plan, says that when an airport achieves 60% of that number, it must begin planning for the increases and expansion that is going to be necessary to accommodate that level of traffic by changing runway, taxiway configurations, airport layout. And essentially what that means is the planning would include, you will soon have, once you reach that level, have traffic that exceeds the capacity of one runway for efficiency purposes. That means you need additional runways, additional taxiways, additional aprons to handle all the airplanes. So to give you an idea, that number at 60% is 378. That's for a planning operation, 378 operations a day. Today we are at 209. By 2040, we will be at 232 in the FAA-approved forecast. These are not numbers that I made up or the port made up. These are numbers that the FAA has approved. When you get to 80% of that 630, that's when you begin building. So looking at the forecast, we're at 209 today. We'll be at 232 in 2040. If that same rate of growth continues, we will not reach 378 flights a day when the planning exercise begins for another 108 years. So the end result is that that number is far off into the future. So to give you an idea, what does 630 flights a day look like? The single busiest one-runway airport in the country is San Diego Lindbergh Field. It has 610 flights a day this past year. That's to accommodate 15.6 million commercial passengers this past year. We have 0 commercial passengers. So the end result is we are not planning to achieve that level of growth anytime soon. And when the master plan update, when you look at the configuration and the changes in the taxiways that we're making in the preferred alternative, they are not high-speed taxiway exits and entrances that accommodate more traffic on the runway. We are required by FAA standards to have every taxiway touch our runway at a 90-degree angle. Many of our taxiways do not. So the taxiway configuration changes you see are not at all for expansion. They are to meet FAA design standards. So the question that you asked, though, at the end with regard to, there were 2 parts to that, to the comments there, Sharon. One was about planes and traffic. The capacity of the airport, we are a public use airport, and we are owned by the port. We accept federal money, state money to build the airport, and therefore we must remain to the public, much as the interstate highway system has to remain open to all motor vehicle traffic. We have, if an aircraft wants to come here, any type of aircraft that our airport can support, then that aircraft has every right to come here. And so that is just the part about being a public use airport. So if there is demand, as the growth of Thurston County continues, as the airport growth continues, then yes, aircraft will have a right to come here. But even with that increase, the forecast still shows we will average 240 flights a day in another 17 years. And to your actual question then at the end with regard to what promises do we make when we accept federal grant money, these are called grant assurances. And essentially there are 39 promises, essentially what it amounts to. Every single grant that we sign or that the Port Commission agrees to accept comes along with these grant assurances. And there are 39 promises. I can provide, they're available online. I can provide you a PDF copy immediately. I keep a desktop copy. Essentially, it says that for the next 20 years, in return for accepting these federal dollars, then you will do this. And these 39 promises are essentially, you will be good stewards of the airport. You will take care of the facilities that we're giving you money for. You will be open and available to all publics. You will not discriminate. You will not show favoritism. You will be good stewards. You will take advantage of, and use DBE, business enterprises, to the maximum extent and meet those goals. So it's just meaning you're being a good steward. There's nothing earth-shattering about them. They're all pretty common sense, and it's a fair return that the airport and the port makes in return for accepting the federal dollars. And those documents I can provide you immediately.
That's great, but it also includes that you have to allow planes that can fit here to come, no matter what our forecasts really are, right?
Well, that would be true. I mean, if an airplane wants to come here, but we use proven methodologies, in terms, and the FAA would not approve the forecast if it saw or thought that there would be more traffic than what we have shown in our documents. Anything to add to that, Darren? And I should ask, since Leah Whitfield is on the line, Missy, maybe you can see if Leah can address that, because she worked on the forecast section in particular, if there's anything she'd like to add. Okay, Leah, anything to add?
Thanks, Warren. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
So just wanted to add, so the topic of grant assurances came up during our first public open house for the master plan a while back. I think it was October of 2021. And we did post a link to those on the Port Airport webpage. I believe they're on the very bottom of the Port's webpage, but that was something that came up. And that link is available to all of the grant assurances for the public's easy viewing. Happy to answer any specific questions about the grant assurances, but I think you mainly covered it, Warren.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Okay, next question.
Always 39 and they're always
Well, they change from time to time. I have to think, when was the last revision? 2016, 2017 perhaps? But they do change periodically over time, and they run concurrently. They run 20 years. So the last time we accepted federal money was for this airport master plan update. The next time we accept federal money is probably about 2, possibly 3 years down the road for the next capital project, and then that 20-year resets. The one difference is that in the event that that federal money is used to purchase land, and we have used federal money to purchase land in the past, then those grant assurances then run in perpetuity, and they don't have a time limit on them. Yes, sir, you have a question. Please come to the podium, and we'll go from there.
Just so you know, a lot of those links to the FAA materials are broken on the website, and I think the grant assurances is one I tried to look up today, and it said not found. So if you could go back and look at a lot of those links, particularly anything linked to the FAA resources, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. And if you ever find anything on our website that's not working, please pick up the phone and call me, because we can fix that immediately before the day is out. So, yes, that is good information to know, and we will double-check that on the website. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I guess I'm a little confused. Are we talking about two different airports? The proposed one and the one that is already in operation?
Yes, sir, we are. And so I need one of those ball caps with two bills on them so that we can wear two different hats, but there are two completely different buckets involved here, if that term is acceptable. The one is Olympia Regional Airport and the planning that we're doing for the first time in 10 years, updating what is on the airport and what the needs and the projects are to bring the airport basically into federal compliance before the end of the decade. The second piece that is open for discussion tonight has nothing to do with Olympia Regional Airport or the Port of Olympia, and that is the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, which is looking at 3 greenfield sites in Pierce and Thurston County in terms of how do we meet the capacity that SeaTac will not be able to provide within 10 years. So we can go in that direction and table the Olympia Regional Airport and talk about what I call the CAC, or internally, the group of us, we call the CAC for CACC, Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission. And if you want to roll there, let's do that.
Okay, I'd like to talk about the new airport.
Please.
I live out along Yelm Highway. I'm about a mile away from the circle around where the new airport's going to be built.
Okay. In Thurston County.
Yeah. And
Okay.
it's to my east.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say that I moved out there 35 years ago to get a little peace and quiet after I got home from Vietnam. I had a little problem in Vietnam, and I needed that. And I got it for a while. Then they brought some bigger missiles over from Yakima and other aircraft, and now we have helicopters and aircraft that fly right over our house. So that's one thing, but I've been out there 35 years, and I can't afford to move right now. I'll probably die on that piece of property because I'm 82, and I just can't afford another piece of property right now with the prices and everything else. But anyway, there to the east, this new airport is going to be to the west. So I'm going to be between two airports if they build this one. I don't know if there's a collision hazard or not, but there certainly will be a lot more noise. And it affects not only me, but my wife. She has a different problem than I do. She's susceptible to RF radio signals. And we get quite a bit of that from Fort Lewis and from all the towers and stuff they have. And so that bothers her. So both of us have a problem with the existing air traffic and electronics. I'm just like to say that I am totally opposed to this for selfish reasons. I can't afford to move anywhere. And as the time goes by, this noise situation is just getting worse and worse and worse. And this is only going to, quadruple it if I have planes going over from the west as well as the east. My question, I have another question, is that isn't there a hazard of having one airport taking off to the east and one taking off to the west? Isn't that kind of a hazardous thing to do when they're so close? Anyway, I'm going to sit down. I said what I wanted to say. But myself and all of my neighbors that I've talked to, about half a dozen neighbors, are totally opposed to this. And can they force us out of our homes? Can we be forced to move?
I don't see that happening, but is eminent domain a legal possibility? It is, but it would have to be exercised very carefully, and I personally do not see the political will to do that.
Anyway, that's all I got to say. I guess that's good enough.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. If there's the question I can answer, yes. In terms of airspace and deconfliction of aircraft in opposite directions, absolutely. There's a safe separation of aircraft that has to take place, and that airspace analysis is part of the process going forward in terms of not only existing airports and but also future development and future growth in traffic. How do we safely separate the aircraft and control the airspace appropriately? And that's the purview of the FAA. I will say, unless there's a desire to go further down that role on what is going on with the CAC's deliberations, is that it's a difficult situation to recognize that SeaTac will be at a capacity. The CAC has no execution authority, no real funding authority to research and analyze. It cannot make a decision. It cannot commence construction. All it can do is plan and research and make a recommendation to the legislature. I will say that what we have learned so far, and I have personally spoken to many of the governments in both Pierce and Thurston County. I presented last week, and it's available on TVW if you're interested, a presentation to the House Transportation Committee last Monday. And essentially, it boiled down to this. There is not a single government at any level, city, county, or port, in Pierce or Thurston County that supports a greenfield site. Nor is there any sovereign tribal nation that supports a greenfield site airport, and there is universal public opposition to a greenfield site airport in both counties. There are significant environmental hurdles. There is an aquifer in Thurston County. There is also an overlap of JBLM's property with the Thurston County site. There is the Nisqually River watershed, and also the salmon restoration habits and the Medicine Creek tribal rights that all have to be considered. The end result is that we are hearing from the local governments, from the constituents. All of that is a good thing. We recognize the opposition. When the commission meets again in early March, undoubtedly, all of this information will be taken into account as they decide the next steps. Ultimately, the recommendation doesn't mean really anything in terms of execution. It's just a report that the law requires that the commission provide to the state legislature. It will then be up to the state legislature to decide what to do, if anything. Okay, sir, please step to the podium. Thank you. And while that's happening, our next question, if there is somebody that's online via Zoom, if you would just raise your hand, then the next question we'll take virtually.
Hi, I'm Sheldon Watson. I appreciate your time here tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Well, this will be a quick dialogue, really. You mentioned greenfield site. The Olympia Airport's not a greenfield. You're talking about capacity for SeaTac. You're talking about expansion of this. Now, I understand you're talking about projections. We could talk about projections when they meet reality, if the projections sort of fall away. So if you needed to do something here, and there's been discussion of that, what would it take to put in a runway? What kind of a runway would you need sufficient to handle a heavy-duty aircraft, a commercial liner, a wide-body jet? How long would that runway have to be? Do you have an idea? I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how long would it be?
The target environment for this new airport would be,
For the new airport, but for a runway, just a runway sufficient to handle heavy-duty aircraft.
generally for not international travel, a good number would be 10,000 feet by 150 or 200 feet wide, depending upon the aircraft.
Okay, so here's my concern. The Swire Company, Swire Corporation, I'm not sure if you know about this. They gave
Yes,
a
I do.
Okay, well, they made a presentation about a bottling company,
Yes,
and that bottling company was going to be, I don't know, put out there on the airport land.
yes.
When I look into this, the largest bottling plant in the world covers about 670,000 square feet. It's in Ireland. The port leased to Swire 4.2 million square feet. That's about 6 times more than the largest bottling plant in the world. And then when you look at the lease, it goes from being to Swire Pacific to being Swire Land. Swire Land was incorporated in Delaware on the 29th of November, the day after the lease negotiations finished. So that's kind of my concern, that you may wind up building an airfield here that's sufficient to handle the overflow of commercial aircraft from SeaTac. Has that been considered or discussed by you or anybody in the port?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me address a couple of things that are in your question. First off, since you mentioned the term greenfield site, I also want to be very mindful of the fact that greenfield sites can be misinterpreted in terms of a label. Greenfield, if you look it up, on a literary basis, would be indication of undeveloped areas. There is no way these greenfield sites that the CAC has been looking at are undeveloped. They are home to residents, rural communities, and businesses. How the CAC is interpreting the term greenfield is simply as a location where an airport does not currently exist, fully recognizing the number of parcels, the number of landowners and residents and businesses and rural communities that exist in there. So that's important. With regard to the Port of Olympia and Olympia Regional's airport place in that, in July 2020, the Port Commission took a vote, as did the Thurston County Board of Commissioners, and said that they would not be interested in any way of supporting Olympia Regional Airport as a location to accept the overflow from SeaTac's limited capacity, that would not happen here. At the January 23rd Commission meeting, in another week, the Commission will reconsider that letter because we have 2 new commissioners on the Commission now that signed that letter in July 2020, and that topic will be revisited with no change in expectations with regard to that. So although the CAC did in fact look at Olympia Regional for, does it have a place to play? In fact, when the CAC first started this work 3 years ago, we actually thought as a group that we would be able to reach the capacity needed by using existing airports. And within that first year, we clearly learned that was not going to be possible, including Olympia. But what also took Olympia off the table for any further consideration and why it has not made the list of any recommended locations is because of the lack of airport sponsorship by both Thurston County Board of Commissioners and the Port of Olympia Commission.
Well, that's very, very good, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah. So, and then with regard to the runway, for a 2-runway to meet the capacity needs of SeaTac, we need a total of 3,100 acres. So those greenfield sites are 6-mile diameter circles. Only a small portion of that, small 3,100 acres, is still 5 square miles, but it doesn't require the entire circle to do that. So the idea is those circles were, and this is an important term, representative circles just for what do we not know about siting an airport in this location? Floodplains, wetlands, environmental considerations, capacity, and it was a place to start. So with regard then now to the Swire lease that you mentioned, yes, it is on airport land. In the chart in the back corner of the room, it is actually it's the one toward the clock. The upper right corner of the airport diagram in the deep purple color is the approximate location of the Swire Coca-Cola plant. It is 95 acres, and that lease was approved by the Port Commission last month. Site visibility is going to begin soon. We did have their company brought their environmental consultants out to take a look this past Monday. However, it is subject to two important distinctions. One, FAA approval that would allow the use of this lease on that land, and secondly, approval of the Habitat Conservation Plan that the port, in conjunction with the City of Tumwater and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is currently engaged in. And if we find that that Habitat Conservation Plan does not allow this type of development, then that development will not happen because of the Endangered Species Act.
Well, a couple of more concerns that come to me. Swire Pacific is located, well, it's listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. It's a holding company for Swire Coca-Cola. It's also a holding company for Cathay Pacific Airlines and also for aviation interests. It has 67% control of an aviation maintenance facility and 52% of Cathay Pacific. That's where part of my concern comes from. The other is that they incorporated in Delaware, which is a great place to launder money if you have it. It's also a great place to hide your true ownership. Those are some of my concerns with what's going on with the airport, because 4.2 million square feet, when the largest plant in the world is less than 700,000, just doesn't add up. It's a tremendous opportunity cost for the port and therefore mismanagement of the assets that we have, or they're considering putting in something other than a bottling plant.
The bottling plant is the requirement of the lease, and that is all that the lease is intended to do. So if they tried to repurpose that land or that lease for any other purpose, the port would have to approve. And so as a result, it is strictly a bottling plant or nothing unless it comes back to the port for a complete reconsideration.
Well, the way that I read the lease, they can in fact repurpose that because it is with Swire Pacific, even though it comes through Swire Land. I hope that you're right, but my reading of the lease is a little bit different.
Okay, okay.
Say they can do warehousing and other things.
Warehousing is not a permitted use on that particular parcel by the City of Tumwater Code. So that is an issue. That's why a manufacturing facility was chosen, for that, because warehouses are limited, in not only on airport land, but the adjacent Newmarket Industrial Campus as well.
Still, 4.2 million doesn't make sense unless they're going to be doing something else with that. And the lease does, in fact, allow. Look into Swire Pacific on their website. They're very upfront about reallocating assets to other businesses, existing or otherwise. And they are a holding company with a tremendous number of employees and a tremendous number of businesses, including, as I say, aviation and aviation maintenance, which makes it convenient for them to come in here. The other significant problem is that it is, in fact, a Chinese company, and they're less than 5 miles from one of our premier military bases and about 80 miles from Bremerton, where our boomers are. Those are our nuclear submarines. So there are a lot of concerns that I have about that, and I appreciate your comments.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm confident. My contact and information has been straightforward. We've had a change in personnel among port staff, and so I am getting more and more involved now with the Swire lease and their individuals, especially with regard to coordination with the Habitat Conservation Plan going forward. The good news in this is, as this bottling plant goes forward, assuming the feasibility and all the requirements and mitigation requirements are effective and take place, and when that plant is up and running, it will produce additional $2 million in revenue to the port, which is a significant economic impact to alleviate any revenue drain on other port resources or on our taxpayer base.
Well, if you'd like, I'll send you my benefit cost analysis, and we'll talk about that $2 million, because really that's kind of a red herring. And the way that lease was written, it's very, very favorable to the company that's, to the lessee. You're talking about adjusting the prices every 5 years, and the rents don't even really start for another 2 years or earlier if they get their,
That's right.
procedures
That's right.
going. The $2 million a year, if that is that much, well, you're still talking about $9.5 million that the port will have to pay for mitigation. So over 5 years, you're basically getting nothing for the port. I'd be more than willing to share those numbers with you, and also excerpts out of the lease, or if you can answer those questions in email format, that would probably be a better.
Sure, yeah, just drop me your contact information. Happy to keep the dialogue going. The normal airport standard lease rate for any land on the airport is 35 cents a square foot, and the Squire lease is at 48 cents a square foot with incremental increases beyond that. And the end result was, in terms of the mitigation for the Habitat Conservation Plan, we took that into account so that we could charge the market rate. In other words, if there was going to be mitigation costs on their part, they could have located somewhere else, but they really wanted to be in this location given the access to the I-5 corridor.
Right, right. Okay, well, thank you for your time.
You bet, absolutely.
Where does that $2 million go, to the port or to the airport?
It goes to the airport.
So what happens to that money?
We use it for paying the projects that we have. The capital investment program that we submitted to the FAA through the next, every year, this was done at the end of August. We submit a 5-year capital plan to the, and I probably should repeat the question. The question is, for those of you online that may not have heard it, the question was, what happens to this lease money from the Swire Coca-Cola lease, and how will that money be used? So the end result is any lease revenue that's earned on the airport and in Tumwater properties, that's Newmarket, Clean Water, and the airport, 100% of the funding has to remain on the airport. Now, the caveat to that is, in years past, the port has made significant financial investments from port revenues to the airport. So the airport is permitted by the FAA to return those funds back to the port. So the end result is, if the port made an investment, until the port as a whole entity is made whole for that investment, from that point forward, then all additional revenue has to stay within the airport fence on the Tumwater properties. How will that money be used? The capital investment plan submitted to the FAA at the end of August includes a total of $65 million of projects by the end of the decade, $44 million of which will be federal and state grants. So the end result is, there will still be a port contribution beyond the grants that are provided, and the end result is that $2 million a year will help meet the port's obligation to those projects, assuming the projects in fact do happen to repair pavement, to do the taxiways for future, just protecting the assets that we have right now. Sir, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. You bet. Please take one of my business cards at the back, and we'll get going from there. Okay. So, Missy, let's, if there's somebody with their hands up online, let's take a Zoom question, please. Not a one? Okay. Who's next? Please.
A response to a couple things that have already come up. You mentioned the money from the Swire Coca-Cola lease. One of the concerns I've had recently is a comment made by Commissioner Downing that he thought it would be a good idea if the Swire Coca-Cola money were used to expand the front footprint of the airport. I have lived in Olympia for about 30 years, and during that time, the last 20 years, I've followed airport issues closely. When I first bought my home, my neighborhood was really quiet. About 10 years after I bought my home, flight paths started developing over my home, and I became aware of airport expansion projects, starting with property buyouts that were forced. Kind of reminds me what the mega airport people are concerned about now. A whole neighborhood was forced to sell their property. It was heartbreaking. And after that, the runway was moved, it was shifted, and it was extended. And at that time, people in a huge auditorium expressed concern that the runway could be strengthened to accommodate heavier aircraft. They were assured that would never happen. 3 years later, the runway was strengthened, new hangars were built, taxiway improvements, the 150-foot wide main runway has been maintained for some reason, which I don't understand if the airport isn't thinking of maybe accommodating larger aircraft in the future. And then we get a comment from Commissioner Downing saying that perhaps the runway could be extended further. You had mentioned that it would take a approval of commissioners. So I think that's something we really need to look at when we vote for commissioners. The ad for this meeting indicates the Port Airport has been responsive to community concerns. My question is, in what specific ways has the airport or the Port of Olympia addressed community concerns about impacts of aircraft operations over the community? I live in southeast Olympia. Many aircraft flights have developed over my neighborhoods, and it's concerning my neighbors. This summer, there were days in the afternoon when we had almost constant aircraft flights over our neighborhoods. And it was definitely became a quality of life issue. It wasn't only the noise that we heard, but when the noise was happening, we weren't hearing natural sounds like birds. They simply disappeared. I'm concerned about health impacts of noise, the increased flights. You talk about aircraft operations and forecasts. Some of the aircraft that we've been experiencing are flying in circles. The airport has been working to accommodate flight training schools and flying clubs, and they fly in circles. And so one operation can often be like 20 flights over Olympia High School, Pioneer Elementary, Washington Middle School. I'm also concerned that many of those aircraft are using leaded fuel, and no amount of lead in the atmosphere is safe. And the Olympia Airport is making money off of sale of that fuel. I'm aware that some airports in California have banned use of leaded fuel, and I think that the Olympia Airport should do that. It's just one of the many concerns of aircraft flights over our community. The forecasts, in the years that I've followed Olympia Master Plan update planning, the forecasts have been inaccurate. They've ranged anywhere from like 50,000 to over 100,000, and generally at the next update, it turns out that the forecasts were not accurate. The CAC meetings tell us that there are going to be 400,000 aircraft flying over Western Washington looking for places to land in the next 20 years. And there's a lot of difficulty in finding a greenfield site. And urban airports have people living around them, and there are adverse public health impacts to that. I really think that aviation planners and people concerned about transportation in general need to start looking at alternatives. Is it really reasonable in a time where we have global warming and we're aware of the public health impacts of aviation, that we are promoting growth of aviation, that we're promoting private aircraft users to fly in circles over our neighborhoods? Maybe the focus at this point should be on alternatives such as high-speed rail. And maybe people should consider not flying so much, which is what I consider in my life with my driving. I can't afford an electric car, but I have cut my car use in half. I don't take unnecessary automobile trips. And so I don't understand why we're promoting aviation as a recreational thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. There's a lot of information in your comments there, and I really appreciate all of it. And each one of it has its own set of nuances. Some applies to airports everywhere, some applies to the CAC, some applies just to Olympia Regional Airport. So let me try to, as best I can, tackle one at a time. Let's deal with the real important issue, the environmental piece, because that is absolutely critical going forward. The CAC, when it's doing its work, we weren't given much guidance from the legislature in terms of how we go about making our decisions. And so in our first couple of meetings, we created our own set of bylaws, and we created our own set of guiding principles. And of the 27 members on the commission, there are 15 voting and 12 non-voting members. It truly is the right team at the table. When I look around the room and I see the expertise and the background and experience from all different venues and professions that have an impact, they're critical thinkers, they're respectful. It's the right group to move forward. But those 4 critical guiding principles that we voted on and are mindful in every piece of deliberation are the public benefit, economic feasibility, environmental responsibility, and social justice. And that environmental responsibility is absolutely a key piece of, they're not listed in any particular priority, but all 4 of them guide the work of the commission. And that environmental piece, you're absolutely right. Any airport going forward, whether it be built here or anywhere else in the country, can not be our mom and dad's airport. It has to be done in a different way. And perhaps maybe that's the opportunity, is that we have an opportunity to create an airport that nobody else anywhere else has built yet. It has to take into account all the environmental mitigations and offsets that are going to be required. It has to use sustainable aviation fuel, and that means biodiesel or biofuels, whatever we can get, but fossil fuels are a showstopper because of the particulates that come and the use and dependence on fossil fuels. The thing is even if Washington State went 100% sustainable fuel, that only fills up the jets before they leave here. Where are the jets filling up? So this is a global issue that we all have to tackle so that everybody is using. Right now, too, there's a certification piece. The FAA will not allow any single airplane to use more than 50% of its fuel on board as a sustainable fuel option. So that means even under the best circumstances today, until it's proven scientifically to have the redundancy and the almost infinitesimal chance of failure, it will be hard. It will be a few years yet before we can get to 100% sustainable fuel, even if we have the production and distribution means. Leaded fuel, absolutely. Leaded fuel is totally unsafe and has to be removed as quickly as possible. This shows up in the piston aircraft but right now there is no suitable alternative available. There is what's called a supplemental type certificate for a company called GAMI, G-A-M-I, that is certifiable in all engines that currently service piston engine aircraft, that most of your light aircraft that don't use jet aviation fuel require. The end result, though, is it's still years away before we see the production capability and the distribution that will bring it here. Now, personally for me, we are the most important, I'm a little prejudiced, the most important airport in the state because we serve the capital city. If there is an airport in Washington State that should be the first to offer unleaded fuel across the board, it should be us. And that is the goal that I would like to achieve while I'm here. And anything that we can do to promulgate that and bring it to Olympia, and then we set the example for the rest of the state. Why not? We have WSDOT Aviation as the state agency, is a tenant on the airport. We are home to the Washington State Patrol and the governor's aircraft and the law enforcement capability. Why not? We should do it here. One of the things, too, I want to point out is in Vision 2025, you may have noticed our new sign on the wall here. We have changed as a result of the commission-approved Vision 2025, a change to our mission and vision statements. And now we are in our vision statement specifically calling out the environmental sustainability quotient. We are putting our vision where our intentions are. This is new. It just was approved recently by the Commission in November and will be part of our documents and mission and vision going forward. So environmental sustainability will be part of it. We have a grant that we're working on in conjunction with the Nisqually Tribal Council with Department of Ecology to assess all of our fleet requirements on an energy efficient basis. At the airport, we're going to go to, if not solar, then all LED lighting to reduce the effects on the grid. And I could go on and on with regard to that. But in terms of environmental concerns, the leaded fuel, the particulates, you're absolutely right. And that's where we are looking forward to the benefits that electric aviation will bring, because it will not require fossil fuels. It will also reduce the noise and will be more economically capable. It's going to be difficult to go ahead and achieve because the battery technology isn't there, but the aircraft are flying. And we have 60 airports in Washington State that could potentially, with 3,000-foot runways, could accommodate it. So that's important. That's important. With regard to the forecast that you mentioned, yes, it is not, it's a little bit of an educated guess, but there's also science behind it. But I will say, I was doing some research in preparation for tonight. When you compare the master plan update right now to the 2013 forecast, I think we've added quite a bit of measure of discretion compared to what 2013 did, because in the 2013 master plan, it expected an annual growth in the number of based aircraft by 1.2%. That's about 50% higher than really is probably appropriate. So, for example, the previous 10-year-old master plan said by 2045, we could potentially have 230 aircraft based here. That's the number that's on the books right now in the 2013 forecast. Our current airport master plan update says in the year 2045, we will be 158 aircraft. That's more reasonable. So we won't see the kind of growth that you may have been concerned about if you're just reading the 2013 plan. The new forecast chapter will show that, and that information is available online on the website now as the draft document here. This is FAA approved going forward. So that's a substantial reduction in the number of based aircraft here. Yes, please.
Sorry, because I looked at that, I've looked at your website quite a lot. What is the title of the thing that you're waiting?
This is called Chapter 2 Aviation Forecast, and on the airport website homepage, if you click on the master plan link that says more information, and then continue to scroll down the page, there will be two sets of master plans data up there. The first one is, the first one that you come to as you scroll down is the 2021 master plan update. If you scroll a little bit further down, you'll see the 2013 master plan documents. Both documents are on the airport website.
And this is from
And
what you just read, chapter 2. Which document is that from?
this is from the 2021 airport master plan update. This will be Chapter 2 of that document. It is still not yet FAA approved or accepted, but it is in draft form. But it has been, I should correct myself there, it has been approved by the FAA, because there are two parts to a master plan update that have to be approved by the FAA. One is the forecast. That has been done. The second piece is what's called the airport layout plan, which is a very technical drawing of all the facilities on the airport as they now exist and are expected to exist, at the conclusion of the master plan, if that's helpful.
And that's still being approved by the
The forecast has been approved. The airport layout plan will be going to the FAA approval probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So if I can
Regarding
come...
my question about responsiveness, how have you responded to community
Yes, I was
concerns?
working my way up my list, so that was next.
Because I'm wondering if you'd be willing to set up a noise complaint hotline where people can call in and register noise complaints, where a record is kept of those complaints, and where there is a written response that says how the port has responded to, for instance, helicopters flying at 500 feet over our homes and neighborhoods. I'm not talking military, I'm talking about the 18 based helicopters at the airport. Some of us have been tracking who belongs to the aircraft that are doing what. How you will respond to aircraft flying in circles relentlessly over the neighborhoods. We'd just like to know some specific actions that the port will be taking to respond to those community concerns. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, that was going to be the next point I was going to reach, is in terms of the community concerns and how are they being addressed. So regrettably, I arrived a little bit late to last week's Port Commission meeting. I was at the state legislature, and I was I arrived after the public comments were concluded to the Port Commission that evening. But the very next day, I went and watched the video. And I saw all 17 comments, and I took copious notes. And obviously, many of the comments addressed the noise and the public concerns. That very day, I've added a noise complaint location on the Olympia Regional Airport website. You go to the airport homepage, and you scroll down to that page, and you can see everything you need to do to file a noise complaint. Now, I will also say that noise complaints are not the purview of Olympia Regional Airport or the Port of Olympia. There are two places to go with noise complaints. One is the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. The other is JBLM, Joint Base Lewis McChord, for the military operations. And the reason is this. Although we run an airport, the airport and the port has nothing to do with the airspace above it. All airspace above the airport is 100% the responsibility and the regulatory authority of the FAA. So the end result is, in terms of noise complaints, there are two parts to this. And in terms of public and community outreach, I had, last September, I had an invitation from the Olympia Council of Neighborhood Associations. Now, again, the airport sits in the city of Tumwater, but what's nice is there is a group of homeowners associations in the city of Olympia city limits that has banded together, and they form an actual council as an advisory to the city council. So they invited me to come speak primarily with regard to noise and how to address it. And when it comes down to the number of operations, and there's no question, there's noise, there's vibration, there's concern, you see, you hear it. I can't deny that. The first question is their operation legal? And that's easily determined by what altitude they're operating at and how they are conducting their flight operations. The second one is, even if it's legal, it could still be a nuisance, depending upon how the power is set, how they use, where they fly. And the end result is, just to make it convenient, we've added those features onto the website so that you come to if you don't know where to go, there's two links. One is, if it's a non-military aircraft, if you can tell, you go directly to the FAA website. It's called the Flight Standards District Office, and the forms and the criteria and the information they need and where to send or even call or email your complaint is all there. If you know for sure that it is a military aircraft, there is a separate section on the airport homepage that now will direct you right to JBLM and give you all the information so you can file that. So that's important. They're the ones that make those decisions, that do those investigations. It would be appreciated, and even on the FAA website, it asks, depending upon what link you click on and where you look, it might ask you, have you contacted the airport? You're always welcome to contact us, but we have limited authority. We have no authority to control the airspace, but we can certainly make note of it. Now, what I personally do, if I can identify that aircraft, and if I can identify that it is, in fact, a tenant on this airport, I will be making a phone call, and we'll let them know that we have received a noise complaint with regard to their operation. That's the least I can do. I did that at Bremerton, and I've done that at Tacoma Narrows. This is the third airport I've worked, and I was also the executive director of the Washington Airport Management Association on a statewide basis. That's what we do. I personally still fly my own aircraft, and as a result, when I fly in and out of this airport, I am extremely cognizant of the neighborhoods, where I fly, how I fly, what my altitudes are, what my power settings are. That's the least I could expect of any of my fellow pilots, so I think that's important. But we wanted to have those noise complaint website links directly on our airport page, so if that would be helpful.
I appreciate that you're doing that. I did want to mention that one of the problems with airports in general and growing them is that the noise levels deemed acceptable by the FAA and that will be deemed acceptable in this airport master plan update are far, far louder than air noise impacts that are deemed healthy and acceptable by the World Health Organization, even the World Bank. They're like 10 times higher. And so I have trouble with the concept of encouraging growth of something of which you don't have control of the impacts of. A number of congressional people have written to the FAA asking that their noise, their methodology of measuring noise be changed so that it actually reflects the actual impacts of people on the ground. And I would hope that this master plan update would require that when noise impacts are assessed, that they be assessed according to the World Health Organization requirements, and that be considered. Thank you.
I appreciate that. You're right. Noise is one of the most difficult things that we have to deal with, and it's probably the most intrusive of anything that we deal with on the airport. It affects the friends and neighbors and how it works. And we in the industry recognize that too. Here is the difficulty that we have is its adoption by the local land use agencies, the cities and counties, of zoning authority and compatible land use around airports. WSDOT Aviation, almost 20 years ago, created a document on compatible land use around airports. It is a Bible. It tells you what you should do, what the buffers are, what is compatible use around the airport, what is not, the approach corridors and everything else. The trouble is here the state agency created this wonderful document, and it cannot enforce that document on anybody, because who makes the zoning decisions around anywhere? It's the cities and counties. So the state cannot impose those compatible land use guidelines on the local land use agency. For this airport, it's the city of Tumwater. When I was at Bremerton, the comprehensive plan for the city of Bremerton included those noise guidelines in its comprehensive plan for the area around the airport. Not every community does that. It's where we need to go, but until the state can get to a position where the state can enforce local land use, and you can imagine the firestorm that would create in terms of overriding, local control of zoning authority, that would be a difficult issue. But if we can somehow find a way to include that, working with the city planners and going forward, it's something that we're doing here. It's something that the city of Tumwater planners are aware of. But when you look at where this airport was back, when the first flight here was 1911, the city bought it in 1928, the port took it over in 1963, and you look at how the community has grown around the airport, how did we allow that to happen? A collective we, because it took away all the buffers, and it's an issue, especially with the increase in traffic over years. So you're absolutely right.
Around the community,
Yes.
in the city limits of Tumwater, and the boundaries of the airport have expanded over the last 20 years.
Well, the boundaries of the airport have not. They are the same, other than that one change of 24 acres to the south along 88th Avenue. But I want to come back to that in a second, too, because that was another point that was raised. As I worked my list, I tried to take good notes as you were talking so I could cover all the points here. But the end result is that noise and the compatible land use guidelines is really critical. I'll give you an example. Snohomish County. Cities and counties have a responsibility every 10 years to do the Growth Management Act review. Ports do not. Instead, the ports, because of the nature of ports as opposed to cities and counties, we have the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, where we have to lay out the properties and, of course, the development plans. The Growth Management Act is done by cities and counties. So different government agencies do different things. But in Snohomish County, they assigned a land use planner up there to go ahead and do the 10-year review of Snohomish County. And as she was threw out the map of the county and looked at it, she recognized that there were 6 airports within the county limits. And she said, we probably should talk to them about what we need to do in this comprehensive land and growth for a compatible land use, so that we treat every airport like we treat every other airport, so that there's not a one-off decision that we treat all 6 airports consistently. So Christina Gahn was her name, and I had the pleasure of meeting her, but for a non-aviator to recognize the importance of this, she called up those 6 airport managers and said, would you be interested in having a conversation on how we can adopt compatible land use guidelines around your airport? And every one of them said, let's see, you're about 20 minutes away, I can be there by 2:30 this afternoon. And their comprehensive land use plan update includes those comprehensive, compatible land use guidelines. We need to make that an issue across the entire state. And it's going to take a task to get there, but if we do that, then it doesn't correct what's already done. That's the trouble. It doesn't correct what's already been done, but at least it will provide for greater protection in the future. So the last thing I wanted to address was the point, I think, where you started was with regard to the airport and the footprint and expansion. So, and the runway shift. So just to be accurate, so there are a couple of pieces to this. One is the runway, back when it was originally constructed, had a huge mound in the middle where an airplane literally sitting on one end of the runway could not see an airplane on the other end of the runway. That's a safety hazard and violates FAA standards. So that had to be addressed. The hump, the hill in the middle of the runway had to be removed. Grant County just recently did this about 2 years ago for their 13,000-foot runway over there, had the same situation. So that had to be addressed. The other issue was the encroachment and the runway protection zone was getting too close to Tumwater Boulevard. So the short story was the port went out, bought 24 acres on 88th Avenue and shifted the runway. It shifted it 758 feet to the south and moved the threshold 667 feet. The end result was the runway length increased, yes it did, 81 feet. So it now is 5,500 feet, and that was an 81-foot extension when that runway was moved. And that meets everything then that this airport needed to provide, and it meets everything now that this airport needs to provide, and through the upcoming Airport Master Plan update period. So we took out the hill, we added 81 feet. By actually shifting the runway to the south, it actually provides a slightly, it's small, but every little bit helps, increased altitude because now the runway was further to the south than it used to be, which means that airplanes approaching from the north are incrementally slightly higher than they used to be. So that's a positive indication too. But in terms of the strengthening and the concern about the weight of the runway, the runway, if you have a single wheel, it's all based upon how many tires are on an airplane. So if you have a single wheel main landing gear, this runway can handle 75,000 pounds. If you have a tandem or a dual tire runway, like you see on some small airliners, that limit is 90,000 pounds. So I know I've heard concern about 737s are going to come to Olympia. Well, I can speak to that directly because in my commercial aviation life, I flew the 737 for about 8 years. That airplane's empty weight is 90,000 pounds. Empty. So that means that airplane could sit on the runway, but it couldn't operate. You couldn't put passengers on it, you couldn't put fuel on it, you couldn't put cargo on it because it would sink into the runway. The runway's not strong enough. And it would never be strong enough, and we have no intention to go forward, with a strengthening of the runway that would accommodate that kind of traffic. Everything that we're looking at will be below that. So we don't see it. We don't see it, we can't take it now, and we won't be taking it in the future. Not without public demand and the area growing to the point that would demand that we do something else. But within this forecast period, which looks out to 20 years, it won't happen. With regard to the width of the runway and what does that 150 feet mean, the end result is that runways were designed for a certain standard, and it used to be 150 feet by whatever length you could provide to meet the requirements of the traffic. The FAA standards now are for the type of aircraft that we have here would only need to be 100 feet wide. So could that in fact happen? Well, Darren and I actually have personal experience with that. When I was the Pierce County Airport planner at Tacoma Narrows Airport, the FAA said you have a 150-foot wide runway that you don't need, and therefore we're not going to help you build it and rebuild it to 150 feet wide. We're going to give you the money to build it 100 feet wide. If you want to keep the same width, that's on your dime. And of course we said, well, we're not going to do that. There's no reason to do it. And the question was, is there any reason to do it? And ultimately there wasn't. And so the end result is when it came time for that runway to be completely reconstructed, that means you literally pull up every piece of asphalt and start over, get down to the dirt and the base and start over. We reduced that runway by 50 feet. And when our runway probably reaches that same point, which isn't forecast for at least a few decades, that probably same decision will come into play, where the runway width may well be reduced. I can't guarantee it, don't know what the standards are going to be down the road, but that's one of the possibilities that could happen. If we went to 100 feet, would it change anything about the airport or the type of aircraft that come here or the nature of our forecast or operation? Not a bit. But it would reduce the cost of maintenance. But we maintain what we have now until it's time to reconstruct. So I think those were all the items. That's a lot, but there were a lot of items that you mentioned there. So, Missy. Yay. Okay, let's take two from Zoom since we had spent some time here.
Rachel Niles. Speak. Rachel, can you hear us?
Rachel, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question or make a comment.
Are you?
Oh, there we go. That works, yes.
Okay,
Welcome.
great. My name is Rachel. I had actually four little topics or questions that I wanted to discuss. And one of them was about the biofuel or the unleaded fuel. Would our airport potentially be able to lean that direction or go that direction without actually having an expansion plan? Is it something that we could implement in our size that we are now, or even in a more environmentally conscious downsize of air traffic and the pollution that it's creating?
If I can take them one at a time, I'll answer that right off the bat. If I had that fuel today, it would be here yesterday. Absolutely. There's no reason why not. All that it would require is that the individual pilots would have to go to the company and make a fairly easy application for permission to use their supplemental type certificate. It's an FAA paperwork requirement that doesn't require any modification of the aircraft, doesn't require any modification of our fuel storage facilities or our trucks on the ramp. If I had that fuel available today, it would be here.
Is there, what seems standing in the way of that fuel becoming available or being available or being here?
Production and distribution. The industry, fuel producers have to begin producing it in sufficient mass that makes it available. And initially the target is, I think it was mentioned before, Santa Clara County in California has in fact banned the use of leaded fuel, so I would imagine those airports in that county will be among the first in the country to get them, but I want to be in line right after them to bring it here. But it's really a production and distribution issue.
Okay. And then the other one is a little bit of the other three topics kind of wrapping together. So it is about people, residential impact, noise pollution, and then capital and money. We were talking about how certain growth opportunities at the port are going to become a revenue maker or a capital gain for the airport or the port, whereas I question whether or not noise pollution to the residents and the people, not only impacting their quality of life, but actually impacting the value of their homes. Because there has been many of research and many statistics put out there that shows with the higher noise pollution, because of aviation, it will decrease home values. So not only are we the residents, I am one of those residents. I live south of the airport, and yes, I know the same aircraft that circle around, and I have the misfortune of actually living on a bluff to where I can look straight out my windows at the helicopters and the people in the helicopters as they go over, not only from this airport, but also military, and they will shake my windows and my walls, and I have lost valuables off of my walls because of these flyovers that I wasn't aware of when I purchased my home many years ago. So yeah, and if you wanted numbers off of aircraft, I could get you numbers off of aircraft. I could get you details off of aircraft. They're right there. I mean, I feel like if I was flying a kite, I would be in their flight path. But what about the difference when it comes to the residents and the people and their quality of life, their values of their properties? Are you guys considering that, or is that not a concern because the capital that would be brought into the port and the airport is really the main focus over the impact that that would be having on the residents and the people? I'm going to take away from one to potentially benefit another.
Well, there's no question, just by being in close proximity to an airport, there's going to be noise, there's going to be vibration, and there's going to be disruption in our daily lives. There's no question, can't deny that. We have more helicopter operations here than many of the airports in South Puget Sound, not only because of the based helicopters here at this airport, but also because of our close proximity to Joint Base Lewis McChord. So can't deny that. It absolutely is a factor. As we look at this master plan update and we look at the noise contours that are part of it, it's small consolation, but all the noise contours that meet FAA standards are in fact contained within the airport fence. Now, that doesn't matter anything at all to you in your home when you're on a bluff looking out the window and you're affected by that. Doesn't matter what's on paper when your daily life is disrupted. I just can't deny that. All I can say is that if there's concern about it, then we bring attention to it, and as what I have seen happen elsewhere, when enough people complain in a particular area, then flight patterns get moved, they get shifted. I'm sure many of you are aware of the SeaTac flight patterns and how they have shifted and amended their routings and departure routes over time, or arrival routes, based upon the impacts it's having on the neighborhoods below. That can happen here too, both with the FAA and with JBLM. So take advantage of those noise links and file that reports. And as the data accumulates from a particular location, then it gets addressed. Certainly, we can be a deliverer of that message to our pilots and tenants on this airport. But there's no question, we have 3 flight training organizations on this airport, and they are busy. And they are growing. And so, yes, when we see many circles of flights around the airport, they are practicing their takeoffs and landings and creating the next breed of pilots. So that's part of their business operations. It's something that we provide. We have to provide as a public use airport. With regard to the revenue pieces that you see, the revenue that is generated by the growth of this airport, or the growth on our industrial properties as we get more tenants and as that moves forward, the intention is we want to maintain the pavement. We're not looking at expanding the operations, growing aprons. We're not putting in new fixed base operators. We have sufficient capacity for that. In fact, one of our runways, we're actually shrinking from down to 3,500 feet. We're actually reducing the amount of paved surface on the runway, which is increasing habitat and increasing pervious surface on the airport. That's all good for the environment. But the revenue will help offset the cost of the pavement improvements and repairs. And we'll just continue to create as much awareness as we can about the noise impact on our surrounding communities. Thank you. Next question there, Missy, online. Okay. Rose, if you can hear us, please verify that you're not muted, and the floor is yours. Thanks for attending tonight.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can. You bet we all can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm impressed by all the knowledge of everyone. I live 3 miles from the airport, and the noise has been getting worse and worse for the 20 years that I've lived by it. I appreciate the noise complaint resource that you just added. And I'm looking at it, and it seems to ask description of the aircraft and things like that. But that often happens at night when I'm in bed at 10 o'clock. I'm not going out of bed, and I can't see anything. So it seems like, what's the point when they ask for information that I have no ability to obtain. I can't tell if it's military, I can't tell if it's civilian. How could I decide whether it's military or civilian? Could you help me with that? And also, since I downloaded the noise abatement procedures, and it seems like it's all voluntary. Is it because you guys are not FAA, or what is the guideline or restrictions from FAA? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, so taking the last question first with regard to the noise abatement guidelines, you're correct. The port has published those. They are available on the website, on the pilot page, and we ask all pilots and tenants that whether they're based here or transiting through here to be aware of it. It's published also in the aviation directories that for noise abatement guidelines, contact the airport manager. And every now and then, I do get a phone call from a pilot that's coming into here and says, well, I understand I should talk to you about noise abatement guidelines, and I send them a copy. And so that way they're aware of the preferred arrival and departure routes and the altitudes at which to operate. But it is voluntary. You're absolutely right, because we, as an airport owner, cannot force compliance when it comes to airspace. With regard to the airspace itself, I don't want to get too technical, but the fact that we have an air traffic control tower here dictates that everyone within 4 nautical miles of the airport, up to approximately 1,500 feet above the ground down to the surface, if they are in that circle, or that basically a tuna can, if you would, if you put that tuna can over the airport, must be in direct contact with the air traffic control tower when it's open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So that provides a measure of consistency and traffic guidance and control, to ensure that everybody's complying with the FAA airspace procedures. With regard to the first comment you made about what happens at night, well, if you're on this Zoom meeting, so you obviously have a computer and you have broken the code to find your way to us tonight, so that means you have a little bit of technical know-how. There is a website that is called flightaware.com. And you don't need a subscription. It's free and it's available. You can go to flightaware.com. It's all one word, all lowercase. And you can just scroll the map to your area and you can see whatever aircraft happens to be flying in your area. You can tell its altitude, you can tell its routing. There will be a yellow line that will carve out where it is as you zoom in. It will even, under most circumstances, will show the registration number of the aircraft. It begins with the letter N for a U.S. registered aircraft or the letter C for a Canadian registered aircraft. And as a result, when you have that registration number, you have a direct line through the FAA to the owner of that aircraft. Doesn't mean that's the pilot, but you know who owns that airplane. And as a result, that is the first place to get that information. So even at night, that information would be available as long as the aircraft was suitably equipped with a device that transmits its position to the FAA radar system. And that's how that's picked up. So I would strongly recommend that. And if you needed some help on how to navigate through that, you can just give me a call and we can jump on it and take a look at it. Last year when I was at Bremerton, I received a phone call from a resident in Silverdale. And he says, I'm not one normally to make a call to the local airport manager, but he says, I found your name and I figured I'd give you a call. He says, because of the pandemic, I'm working virtually. He says, I have a high pressure job, but he says, for the last 4 hours, I have had an aircraft circling over my head, for a little bit of time, I get traffic is coming to and from the airport, that's fine, but this has become excessive. So I used that website myself, found out the N number. Turns out it was a Washington State Patrol law enforcement aircraft. They were in the midst of breaking a homicide situation, and so as a result, they had airborne patrol. And so I said, let me find out, and I'll get back to you. I was able to call Washington State Patrol. I said, I think I know what's going on. I said, you probably can't give me any details. But they said, you're right, can't tell you too much other than it'll be on the news tonight, but that is our aircraft, and here's why. We have an ongoing active investigation process. I called the gentleman back and said, it's not going to help alleviate the noise, but here's what's going on and who they are. And he says, well, if they're doing their job, then I'm good with it. So that was a good news story. That's not always the case, but there is a way to find out who the aircraft owners are and how we can file those reports. Okay, let's come back in person. Yes, sir, in the back. Well, let me grab somebody that hasn't asked a question. Sir, you're here in the front. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't see it. Well, can I get to you next? Or you guys decide?
I'll go second.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
As long as I'm in the queue.
Absolutely. Everybody's in the queue.
I'm Charlotte, and I'm just
Welcome.
speaking for myself, although I am a member of the Stop Olympia Airport Growth Group.
Okay.
Okay, you mentioned that the counties, Snohomish County, included in their comprehensive plan the land use guidelines from WSDOT. Are you aware that Thurston County is in the scoping phase of updating the comprehensive plan?
Yes.
And have you all been in contact with them? Have you written comments that said, please include this?
Our port staff, I have not been involved directly in that effort, but members of our port staff certainly have been.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. That's good to know. And I assume that as the other cities come along, you'll be involved in their updates to their comp plans as well, right?
Count on it.
Okay, excellent. That's good to know. And we would have done the same if we'd only known. But maybe that's the kind of communication we should have from you, too.
See, this is absolutely, I mean, this is how we learn the importance of the neighbors surrounding the airport, and maybe we can pick up on this, and if we all work on this together, then we can ensure that the guiding documents then that we all live and work under, will meet the needs of our neighborhoods and communities.
Okay, the other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to say that I think part of my confusion has been the version of this chart over here on the third from the front that has it has the forecasts.
Okay.
And that a version of that chart was in the PowerPoint for
Yes.
so it's page 21 of the open house, the fourth open house.
Yes.
And the chart was mislabeled.
Yes.
Okay, and because of that mislabeling, we have been under the confusion that you were thinking of increasing not emplanements separate from operations, but operations altogether. And that I think that's been part of our confusion about what the master plan update actually forecasts.
Right. Right.
But we did look at the 2013 plan and said, okay, that's 630 flights a day that could be here. And so I think that's part of our confusion.
Absolutely.
Okay, but you created that confusion by having an incomplete chart. And when I listened to your presentation, all I heard was the word operations. I didn't hear anything about emplanements versus operations.
Okay.
Okay. And the other thing is, even so, I would like to challenge part of that chart over there, and that is that its predictions of how much sustainable aircraft we will have by 2035 and 2040 seem very high to me because of the very slow turnover in the American fleets. Each airplane lasts 20 to 40 years. And for us to get to 40% sustainable in the next 18 years seems incredible. So I think you might think about that in your chart. I know that a lot of this is still in draft form, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so just think about that in terms of maybe making your draft a little more less optimistic about the use of sustainable aircraft. Okay.
Okay. Well, good. A couple of things. If you noticed, specifically, it was slide 21. If you looked at slide 21 now compared to that chart over there, you will see the numbers are different. We found after production of that slide, of that board, when we had the open house here in October, that there was an error in it. So the numbers are different. And one of the and especially when it comes down to operations versus emplanements. An operation is one airplane and a takeoff or landing. Doesn't matter how many people are on it. An emplanement is one person getting on that airplane. So an emplanement is how many people are actually boarding an aircraft for departures. Obviously, the larger an aircraft, if an aircraft can handle 35 people, that would be 35 emplanements, but one takeoff is one operation. So to come up with an understanding, and that's why you can see the ultimate numbers there are 200, I believe, my eyes aren't that good, but at this distance, if I recall, I think the pasture count was 288,000 potentially and 20,000 operations. I do remember seeing a question somewhere along the line about, well, what does that equate to? That's on an annual basis. That would be 59 operations a day. That would be, and that's total operations. So that would be approximately 29 or 30 takeoffs and 29 or 30 landings for that. And that's if that forecast actually happens. And that's for the commercial piece. We don't, which is completely separate from the other numbers. So when I mentioned before about we're at 209 flights a day, now expected to get to 232, that's without commercial service. So it's only if the community recognizes that we would like to have commercial service here at Olympia Regional Airport, and an airline says, hey, Olympia Regional, we want to come and operate a commercial aviation service from your airport. You know, and if somebody did that, well, we don't have the facilities. They would have to come in and they would have to help make that happen. They would have to build the terminal, they would have to do that, and they would have to provide the facilities because the port is not in a position to do that. And they would have to factor that into their business model as to whether it's sustainable or not. But those numbers, you know, would be over and above than the existing capability. And it's not something that is normally done as part of a master plan, but given the recognition by the port, this is even, goes back even before I came here, that there is capacity limitation for aviation throughout Puget Sound, the question was asked, well, how does that roll down to here, potentially? Not that we want any part of playing in with CTAS capacity, but just in terms of, is there a demand from this community for aviation service, a commercial service? And that's what that feasibility does. So it's not actually part of the master plan itself. It's going to be an appendix to the master plan update to just provide this information and availability. And I hope that helps a little bit because, when I first heard the 630, it was finding, as I mentioned before, it was just a question of finding the source document, what does that mean, and what does that look like to us in terms of operating this airport. So I hope we have a little bit clearer idea as to exactly where we are today and where we're going, and that the 630 is not really, it's just a capacity number. As an example, last Monday when I was at the state legislature, Spokane talked about its capacity. It has right now an airport layout similar to ours. It has a main runway with a secondary runway for crosswinds. Its main runway is longer than ours because it has commercial service, but it's still a similar layout. I chuckled when I actually saw one of their depictions on the slide, is that they said that airport in its current configuration, its maximum capacity, again, similar to Olympia in terms of layout, is 285,000 a year. That comes out to 589 a day. So you can see that a similar runway, even on the other side of the state, would still have an ultimate capacity. Now, where are they? They're only at about 40% of that total capacity today, actually less than that. And so they're nowhere near the ultimate limits of that airport. But it was just an interesting data point in terms of what a given airport in a given location. And that number would be the case from the time this airport was built, you know, back in '06, whenever it was. Yes, please do. Yeah.
So you said this possibility of having commercial service, which would then add what's on that slide or something maybe more updated. If the MPU master plan update is approved by the Port Commissioners, that will also be approved, right? The commercial possibility will also be approved.
Well, there's a nuance to this, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the Port Commission doesn't actually approve the master plan. So the master plan is a planning document. It basically says, here's what we got, here's what the approved forecast is, and again, the FAA says here's what the forecast is, and then it's like, what do we need to do on the airport to meet that forecast? So that's the plan. It's a planning document. The FAA approves two pieces. The forecast, that's already been done, and the next piece is the airport layout plan. That is literally that technical map of the airport. What you're seeing over here toward the clock is a non-technical version of that. Very non-technical. It just describes general layouts and what the the general gist of things going. There's a lot more technical information in terms of property ownership, how the property came to the airport. There's a complete property record. There's runway safety areas, protection zones, all the technical details that drive us all crazy. But that is the airport layout plan, and that part is approved by the FAA. Those are the two pieces that are approved. When it comes to the port, and it won't come to the Port Commission until that airport layout plan is approved by the FAA, then the decision by the port is not really whether or not to approve it, it's whether to accept it or adopt it into the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. That was something we mentioned earlier, that this is the document that lays out all the port properties and what our developmental guidelines are for the years ahead. And so that will be the decision that will come to the Port Commission. There's probably a question of when is all this going to happen? Well, we'll be submitting, the documents that you see on the website are the ones right now that have completed their draft form and/or approval. There are still a lot of other documents. I actually have an IOU to Darren and Leah that we've tweaked a little bit about some of the hangar developments, so it's on me, and they're waiting for me to do my part to come back and look at their adjustments to say, yeah, I agree or disagree, or why don't we do this, to finalize that drawing and then finalize the documents that back up the drawing. Once all of that gets in final stage in draft form, when it's ready to be submitted to the FAA, all of it will be posted on the website. It's not there now, not all of it is there now simply because it's not done yet. And when we present that to the FAA, then their clock runs. I can't say for sure how long it will take them to review the entire master plan and approve it. They have new staff up there, but the good news about new staff is I personally am seeing that they are more responsive than perhaps had been in years past. And they are pushing their work accomplishments on a quicker basis than they had in recent years. So I expect them to turn that around pretty quickly, 60 to 90 days potentially, no guarantees. But then when that happens and it comes back to us and they do approve it, or maybe they come back and say, we want you to do a couple of other things, we found a few things we want you to address. We play ping pong a little bit with them until we get the document to the place where they are comfortable with it, and then it's approved, they let us know it's approved, and then we will bring that document back to the Port Commission for their adoption.
So this is not going to happen in February, as you said in the open house in October. It's going to happen sometime in May.
In February, yes, and perhaps we worded that wrong, and if I misstated that, in February is when we'll be submitting the documents to the FAA. Okay, so there won't be any action by the Port Commission. We're teeing up a work session because it's important that the commissioners, and it was great that Commissioner Downing was here for an hour or so earlier this evening. The commissioners, I have spent some time with each of the commissioners one-on-one to let them know where we are, generally high level, but we're going to get more into the details, especially after the public comments from last week. There's a lot of interest. So in February, we're going to take another deeper dive during a work session with the Port Commissioners, which is an open public meeting. We don't take public comment during work sessions, but we're going to get into the details a little bit more about the master plan, and by then we should have some finalized documents that are going to the FAA to bring them up to speed. And then that will be a prelude for when we actually bring it back before the commission.
Which might be May.
I won't put a calendar date on it because I don't control what the FAA does and how quickly they do it. I will say it will be when the FAA returns to us an approved document. Time and date to be determined. How's that? Does that work? Okay, lots of hands now. But this gentleman here had offered to go second. So, sir, I'm going to come back to you. So, please do.
So I just have a few areas of comment. I guess the first point that I'd like to make is I think the airport is a really underutilized asset for the community. I mean, the airport that we have, the land, the size of the airport, it's really a potential gem. Well, it is a gem for the area, and I see a tremendous potential for the airport. There's so much, I mean, even just looking at the photos, there's so much open space, and relative to many other airports of this size, it's really not a high-traffic airport. And I just see that the airport could be so much more. And one of the things that I think is important for everyone to consider in the community, I know that there's, airplanes make noise and there's a lot of nuisances that sometimes come with growth and development. But another really important consideration, I think, for everyone to consider is the economic benefits that growth and development would bring. And that relates both to the Olympia Regional Airport as well as any potential CAC site which may be located nearby. There's a number of businesses that are attracted to investment in the airport. This creates a lot of employment and jobs. And when we have this sort of economic development, more businesses and jobs coming in, this is something that really benefits the entire area, including our family and our friends. And I think it's really important to keep those issues in mind as well. The last thing that I actually didn't plan on speaking to, but just relates to something that I just heard, was the issue of the 100 low lead fuel. It's really concerning to me to hear about proposed limitations on 100 low lead fuel, particularly as you astutely point out, there are no reasonable alternatives at this point in time. And it is the type of fuel that, as you know, virtually all piston aircraft utilize. And there are safety reasons for why the low lead formulation is used, and we could go into technical explanation of that, but there's detonation and things that can happen in the engine that a small amount of lead in the fuel helps to prevent. So safety is really important as well, and I think that if we're going to be able to reap those economic benefits that I touched on earlier, it's really important that we allow the aircraft to continue to operate, and having that fuel available is essential and important for that. So, thank you.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you for your comments. If it's helpful, here are some numbers. In December 2021, the port engaged a company to produce an economic impact statement for all of the port. And the airport itself, its total economic impact on Thurston County is $186 million. And we produce 3,184 jobs, both direct and indirect. We provide $18.9 million per year of taxes to the local economy and $31.1 million of federal taxes. So that's a significant impact that this airport has because of the Tumwater properties, the jobs that are there, and the revenue that's generated by its existence. And I'm also glad, too, that you mentioned the public benefit because that's huge. When I think about what this airport brings to the community, it's not something that we think about on a daily basis until we need it. But Airlift Northwest is a tenant on the field. I spoke to their base manager yesterday. They operate on a July to June timeframe on a fiscal year basis. They've already had 318 missions since the 1st of July. That's almost 2 a day. And they service not only they have 12 flight nurses, 4 pilots and a mechanic, 1 helicopter. They provide 24/7, 365 days a year service to our community. And that means life-saving potential, not only for Thurston County, but they also serve Mason County and Lewis County and Grace Harbor County from here. And because we have an airport that has night lighting and instrument capability, they can fly because their aircraft and their pilots are certified appropriately. It doesn't matter the weather unless it's truly down to nothing. They can operate and they can perform their life-saving evacuations. That's huge. And then I spoke to the Washington State Patrol and I said, so what's keeping you guys busy these days? And just some of the highlights. They've assisted in the apprehension of a quadruple homicide suspect. They were in WSP SWAT missions with a barricaded subject. They do the nationwide Operation Safety Driver emphasis. They have assisted the Lakewood Police Department on multiple occasions with a looting emphasis. Large traffic safety missions across the state. And just some of the numbers. 23 DUI requests, 22 DUI assists, 60 pursuit assists, 92 suspect searches and containments, and 9.5 hours of backup traffic saved. Total savings of $189,490. So that's Washington State Patrol. They're a tenant on the airport. And our other tenant that has a direct public benefit is the Department of Natural Resources firefighting capability. They have 2 helicopters based here. Sometimes they ramp up, but I didn't know this. They are one of 10 regions in the entire state that respond to rapidly emerging wildland fires, and all statewide training occurs at the Olympia Regional Airport because of the facilities that we offer. So every wildfire that happens in the entire state as a result of training that occurs right here in our community. That has a positive economic impact as well as a safety impact on our communities. So it's just part of the story about the tenants that are on the airport and what they do for the community. Okay, we have a new hand in the back, so please come forward and bring your question. We're getting down to the last few minutes. I'm happy to go a little bit over if there's more questions, but hope you're having as much fun as I am. So go right ahead.
My name is Lynn, and before I ask my question, I'm going to respond for a minute to the gentleman who did not give his name.
Kevin McDowell.
Thank you. I don't think it's just a matter of inconvenience of noise. There are health impacts on people from noise, both to their heart, their nervous system, their sleep, etc. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's better. There are health effects on people from noise that have to do with their hearts, their nervous system, and their sleep. And in regards to leaded fuel and the safety of it, the impact of lead on people's health is, again, from heart disease to miscarriage to ADD, on and on, very serious health effects. So I don't think we can just minimize that. However, now to get to what I was going to talk about, I'd like to talk about transparency of process. There was an open house, which, as I recall, was not online, so you had to come down during the pandemic and look at things, which then you didn't have anything to refer to later. So you guys have the information. The public doesn't have access to the information. The draft is not anywhere and won't be for a long time. So we go off of slides that then we're told later, oh yeah, that slide wasn't correct, but are told in the media that we're giving out misinformation. Well, the information comes from you as best we can get it. And now I just heard you say these are planning documents, but the port won't pass them. So where does democracy enter into this? Like, at what point does the community get to say, actually, some of these plans we don't like? I mean, if the elected port commissioners will not actually vote on any of this, if staff is producing planning documents, I mean, planning documents still direct the direction that something's going. It does create change over time. So, yeah, where does democracy enter into that? And then there's a quote from you in the Jolt where you said, the FAA cannot impose anything upon us that we are not willing to accept other than the promises that we agree to when we accept federal grant money. And on one of those slides, it said strengthening of the runway was in the goals of the future. But I heard you say in this meeting, oh, we're not going to strengthen the runway. So if you take FAA money to strengthen it, that will obligate certain things. So Jan Witt has written several times asking, what are we already obligated to because of previous grants and has not received an answer for that. So again, in terms of transparency, it seems very hard to engage with facts because they're kept sort of outside of our reach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that comment. There's a couple of pieces to that. Since 1993, the Port of Olympia has received from the Federal Aviation Administration over $28 million of projects, and I have a complete list here. Happy to provide that to anyone at any time. Each one of those projects does incur those grant assurances, which then runs from 20 years from the time of grant award. So the most recent one was the master plan update that we're still in the midst of right now that's going on. So that's that piece. With regard to the transparency and the process to this, so when a master plan starts, the first group that comes together and convenes that provides advice and consultation to the port is the Technical Advisory Committee. That committee is comprised of industry and community experts. TRPC was on it. The POCAC, the Port of Olympia Citizens Advisory Committee, was on it, which is your direct avenue to provide input to the Port Commission to the Airport Master Plan. So they were a participant in this process. There were 4 Technical Advisory Committee meetings in May, July, and December of 2021 and March of 2022. And then there were 4 public open houses. If you want, we could consider this one the 5th, perhaps. But in terms of directly toward the master plan, the first 3 were offered in a virtual method only. They were in September of 2021, February of 2022, and May of 2022. And the most recent meeting in October was in fact a hybrid version. It was offered. It was the first and only open house, given to where we were in the pandemic, that allowed us to go in person. And because of popular demand, we did make it a hybrid meeting. At first, it was going to be in person only, but because we had so many phone calls from people saying, I either am unable or do not want to participate in person, given, just health cautions, it was great to hear, because normally master plan updates, historically are always done in person to have that direct engagement. But clearly, we've shifted the paradigm. I will never have a meeting again, just like tonight, that's not offered in a hybrid format. We can reach more people and do it in a very productive way. The technology's there to support it. We've learned a lot along the way, and that's the way we'll do it. So that meeting in October was in fact offered in a hybrid format, and everything that was offered at that meeting, these storyboards and that PowerPoint presentation, was all loaded on the airport website before that meeting, and I verified that myself. So that was all available. So it was there, and so there was nothing discussed in person that wasn't available to those that attended online. And we continue to update. This board that I said we corrected, I picked it up at 7 o'clock last night from FedEx. It's brand new. So is it online yet? No. Will it be? Yes. Will it be incorporated and changed? And that's the purpose of a draft document, is to research and double check and make sure you get your numbers right, so that before it goes to the FAA, we really have a succinct document. That's important to us. And I want you to know that your views to us being transparent in that way is also very important to us. We're public servants. This is a community airport. You own it. We're just the stewards. And we want to make sure we do a good job, and that means meeting the requirements of the taxpayer. So as the airport master plan is done in accordance with the FAA, what's called an FAA advisory circular, and that lays out the requirements of the plan. It is a relatively technical document. It's not one that is subject to a democratic process. If one of the things that, I'm not sure if it's on that slide over there or available, in terms of just having everybody to vote on whether they want it or not, there are certain standards that we have to meet as an airport, and as a result, we have to comply with those standards. So the master plan gives us a method by which we do that. It's really not one that's subject to a vote as to whether or not you choose to meet the standards or not. That's the requirement by virtue of the fact that we have a public use airport. So as a result, when we looked at the communication strategy, it's called IAP2 Spectrum. I'm not exactly sure where that acronym came from, but it defines 5 different levels of input. And a master plan, a document of this type, the public involvement is the first 2 steps: inform and consult. And that is where the consultation takes place, and the input is provided to those that have the engineering companies, the port staff that have the expertise to craft a master plan to submit to the FAA. And that consultation place is what took place over the last year and a half, a combination of all those technical advisory committee meetings and all those open houses. They were all available. I have to say that probably tonight we have greater attendance. Certainly at last week's commission meeting was more than we had seen at any of our open houses. And I attended several of them even before I came to the port myself as an employee. And so this is great. We're getting more involvement now, and it's important that we hear this. And as we go forward, again, this is a planning document only. As we go forward, as we implement projects in the capital budget, as we go through the environmental process for any project that requires certain environmental steps to be made, there is public involvement every step of the way. There will be a SEPA planning SEPA that will be done as part of the master plan update. Somewhere in here, I even have the one that was done for the 2013 master plan. Is right here, and we will do a similar type document for this. To the extent, it just basically says, here's what the airport has today, here's where it's going, here are the environmental steps that have to be done when they get to the execution implementation phase. And that's what we'll do. And there will be public involvement throughout. Everybody gets to see what we're doing in our budgets, how we're planning our funding, what our sources of funding are, how we do the grants, and then there is, of course, going to be public involvement for any environmental discussions going forward. Stand by for the Habitat Conservation Plan as an example. That document will be going forward to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They'll commence their environmental assessment. That environmental assessment will include a public hearing and comment period of time, and that will be your opportunity to take a look at that document, how it affects both the city and the Port of Olympia on the airport.
But wasn't your question is, how can we say, no, we don't like this plan update, especially the layout, the alternative layout? And that's what I don't think you're really answering.
Well, I'm not sure what you would do differently. What is it that you most object to in terms of that plan? We're fixing pavement, we're meeting FAA standards. I guess that's where...
Things on there like moving terminals and paving over a new place to have 600 parking spots and stuff like that.
What terminals are being moved?
Well, as I understood it, there's now a terminal on the other side of the airport from where the old one was on the other side of the airport. There's also 600 parking stalls. You know, there's things like that, right? You're looking at me like I'm making this up.
No, I'm just trying to focus on exactly what specifically you're focused on. We're not moving buildings. The port is not intending to move any buildings over there. The WSDOT Aviation Terminal, which used to be the terminal, that's staying put. WSDOT Aviation is not moving. We're in the process of renewing their lease here in this next year. So the commercial, in terms of the diagram there, that commercial capacity, that was a, I wouldn't necessarily call it hypothetical, but it's just one alternative of if commercial service should come to Olympia Regional Airport, how would the facilities be constructed and where to meet that demand? But that's only if and when it happens. But that's not something that we're actively planning on right now, but we have to allow for the possibilities if the market materializes. Yes, please.
No. She's my daughter.
Yeah, sorry, I'll step in front of my father there. So I think there's a lot of confusion when the commercial feasibility study got tacked on to what is a master plan update. And my understanding is the FAA does not require that commercial feasibility study. That's not a required portion of the master plan update. And I think it's greatly confused the community as to what we are really looking at with the master plan update. My question is, if it's not required by the FAA, why don't you pull that service feasibility study back out of the material that's going to the FAA? Give the community a time to talk about specifically at a separate time and place the commercial feasibility study. If you're not looking at doing it now, doesn't the community have a right to discuss that separately? And the FAA is not requiring it. So I guess one of the questions is, if the FAA is not requiring it, why are you tacking it on to the material that's going to the FAA? While I'm up here, I had a couple other things. And I think that may be getting at part of the confusion here about what's moving and going where, because you tack that on to the material that's going to the FAA when it was not required. My next thing is, in communication, I've heard from the community the word expansion. And people will say, well, we hear the Olympia Airport's expanding. And the port will push back and say, no, we're not expanding. No airport runways are being changed or moved. We're not expanding. But from a community standpoint, when we hear the word expansion, there are different ways of looking at it. One is the land on the ground of an airport. Is that changing? The other is the number of aircraft that might be over our communities. That can expand in terms of our frame of thinking about it. Also, there would be the types of aircraft, the size. So, for example, I know commercial air services, including cargo, often have bigger, larger planes. That, if you're a person living in a house, can be felt like an expansion. All of a sudden, we go from a little Beechcraft Bonanza, and now you've got an ATR 600 flying over your hand. I think that's the name of the plane. So that's another type of what a community person might think of as expansion. The other time would be time of day that the flights are coming and going. So right now at our little GA airport, primarily most of the aircraft you hear is during the daytime hours. We do get some at night, but not very much. But if there was a commercial expansion and cargo was allowed, we would be expecting to hear a lot more noise during the night. As we all know, cargo can come and go at night, and often does. That's a great time for them to come. So community member would think of that as the word expansion. What I would like to see with communication is that if somebody from the public comes and says, are you expanding the Olympia Airport, that the response comes and addresses all of those different parts and does not just say, no, we're not changing the runways. I think that's probably enough for you to be able to answer. I'll come back or let my father ask questions after me. Thank you.
That's okay. No, thank you. No, I remember talking to you after our November meeting, that evening that was in town. So with regard to the feasibility operation, you're right. It's not required as part of this plan. It's going to be an appendix. It's not embedded within the master plan update itself. It was part of the scoping exercise when the port approached the FAA and said, we are due for a master plan update. They said, yes, you are, and we will fund it. We said, is it possible that in the scope, we should probably, given the awareness in the industry throughout Washington State, particularly in the Puget Sound region, with regard to aviation capacity and the need for future commercial service, is it feasible and reasonable for us to consider looking at what potential Olympia Regional may offer, not to support SeaTac in any way, but to provide commercial service for the residents of Thurston County on a point-to-point basis, or maybe to hub and spokes at some level. And the FAA said, that's totally appropriate, and we'll pay for it. So the end result is, quite honestly, why is the feasibility part of the master plan update? The FAA is paying us to do this and paying our consultant team. By the way, without any contribution, the grants at the time this master plan was offered, normally it's 90% FAA, 10% port. This grant was issued at a time when Congress had approved 100% FAA reimbursement. So this costs nothing to the port, and the FAA is funding the entire master plan update and the feasibility check, no cost to the port or to our taxpayers, and because they are funding it, it becomes part of the document submission. So that's the simple answer there. They said it's probably worth looking at, and we'll fund it. So that's why. If it was a port-funded project, then it wouldn't need to be part of the master plan. You're absolutely right.
And does having that piece, which
Warren, can I chime in real quick?
Oh, please do, Leah. Thank you.
Sure. So I appreciated the comment, and sorry I didn't get your name, regarding the confusion, and it has become very confusing, especially with some of the CAC information coming out right before we held our public meeting in October. So there was a very specific reason why we did not discuss the feasibility study, and we did not start the feasibility study until the majority of the airport master plan update was complete. We did the airport master plan update public meetings over 3 meetings, and that was very specific, just airport master plan. And the Part 139 feasibility study, that was the only topic for the 4th public open house. And so we intentionally tried to separate them to avoid the confusion, because it is an appendix, as Warren stated. It's an appendix to the airport master plan, and it's kind of a standalone separate document. And so we did all of our public outreach for the airport master plan, and we concluded that. We were in the final technical chapter writing, and all of those, pretty much most of those decisions had been made, and then we jumped into the Part 139 feasibility and held that public meeting in October. So just wanted to point that we did try to avoid that confusion by separating those public meetings. And also, Warren, just worth noting, some people are not coming to the podium perhaps, and so we can't hear what some of the questions are. And there is someone online with the name South Sound Fruit Society that's had their hand up, I think, the entire time.
Okay, I'll be right there. Good, thank you. Thanks for those comments, Leah, and the explanation. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. With regard to expansion, this is why we're having this dialogue, so we understand each other in terms of what expansion means. You know, the initial thought is in terms of runways and footprint and buildings and landscape. We're not moving the airport fences. We're actually shrinking one runway. And so when we think of expansion, normally we start talking about the footprint of the airport and the pavement and the surfaces that we offer. And we're actually shrinking one runway and just maintaining the rest. All the other movement is actually relocating or addressing FAA standards as opposed to increasing anything. So that's good that we understand then what expansion means, you know, to one person may not necessarily be the same that it means to somebody else. So in terms of the land on the ground, no, there is no change in land at all on the ground. The airport footprint and all of its properties remain exactly the same and do not change. The last acquisition was those 24 acres back in almost 20 years ago now, and that's the last land extension that took place, and there are none that are focused any time in the future. With regard to the number of aircraft, yes, that is part of the forecast that is approved moving forward, and we will see an increase in the number of based aircraft that will occur here on the airport, much less than what was in the 2013 master plan. But in any case, there will be some growth on the airport if the airport, and the master plan does contemplate building new hangars if the habitat conservation plan will allow us to. We can anticipate an increase of based aircraft, which would mean a potential increase in operations, depending upon how often those aircraft fly, if we build new hangars. That is a possibility. It is accounted for in the forecast. We have, as of yesterday, 89 people on our hangar wait list. So if I could build 50 hangars tomorrow, I could probably have them filled by Saturday. It won't happen that quickly. We have a hangar feasibility project in the capital budget for this year to determine what can we do until the habitat conservation plan is in place, and whether or not it's feasible as a business case. The port is all about, if we build it, we have to be able to recoup the investment that the port makes in a favorable way. We're not going to subsidize anything that can't be justified economically to the benefit of the taxpayer. So that will be part of it. But yes, number of aircraft will increase over time, even though it doesn't require an expansion of the footprint of the airport or the pavement or the location of the airport fence. The types of aircraft we don't see changing very specifically. The runway and taxiway patterns are, and the aircraft standards we meet are directly, or the airport standards that we meet when we build runways and taxiways and widths and locations and safety areas and where buildings can be with respect to all that pavement is all dependent upon the type of aircraft that operates here for the most part. I mean, not for the most part, but I mean, the greatest percentage of the flights of a particular type of aircraft. That hasn't changed. It hasn't changed since the 2013 master plan. It's not changing in this one. So there are technical criteria that have to be met based upon the wingspan of an aircraft and the speed of its approach. Technically, we are a C2 airport that addresses a particular number for the speed of an approaching aircraft and the wingspan of that airplane. That's how our airport is designed, and we meet those standards, and nothing is changing from that aspect. Now, does that mean that different types of aircraft may come in that are within that C2 category? Yes, but that's just a different type of airplane. It doesn't necessarily mean an expansion in the technical aviation sense, but from a community's aspect, it could. Time of day, we are a 24/7 operation. There's no question. Should commercial service happen, what will happen with regard to that? All to be determined. But that is, again, it's a planning document, it's a feasibility issue, and it's at least 12 years away. The commercial feasibility shows that it's not possible on an economic basis until 2035 at the earliest. And only then if the industry is willing to support it, and only if the industry is willing to support it, in addition to the community demand. So I hope that helps. But I think just knowing that, I think it's a point well taken that when we say a term, we need to define what that term means, that we all can agree on. So I really appreciate those comments. Okay, we have somebody online. So thanks, Missy. And I'm okay with staying a little bit longer if you are. Is everybody okay? So I'll leave it up to you. So I don't see anybody leaving yet. So. I'm not leaving. I'm just going over here. Okay, great. Okay, so online question. Okay, great. Okay, and South Sound, if you can hear me, just verify that you're unmuted, and happy to take your question or your comment.
Thank you for taking our question. There are two people with questions here.
Okay.
But please ignore the label, the name that showed up. That's not what should show up, so please ignore that.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions about helicopters. Are helicopters required to file flight plans?
The first required, no. No aircraft is required to file a flight plan unless they operate as a Part 121 commercial service carrier or Part 135 operation based upon their certificate. But that gets an FAA technical, but a typical tenant aircraft or helicopter is not required to file a flight plan unless flying in instrument conditions.
Unless flying in, okay. Okay, so helicopters do not have to file a flight plan. Okay, go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay. My name is Jeff Foster, and I live in Olympia. My question is, you stated that the FAA is providing all the funding for the master plan, and they also provide a lot of funding for capital projects in the airport. Is that correct?
That's correct. As long as the capital project meets the requirement or the definition of eligibility, and it gets a little technical, I'm happy to go into the details, but if a project is deemed eligible by the FAA, then it will provide the funding, yes.
Okay. So that raises in my mind, I think of that as creating what's called a federal nexus from the standpoint of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. The federal government is largely responsible for the funding of this. So I guess my question is, why is NEPA required for this?
It is, as a matter of fact. When a project is executed, when we go into the taxiway relocations that are shown in the master plan preferred alternative update, when we actually go forward and start to move on those projects, or even, and federal funding is involved, the first thing that will come forward to the FAA will be an environmental determination. Is a NEPA, and that's part of the NEPA process. Now, in some cases, they issue a DNS, what's called a determination of non-significance. In other words, if you are just, for example, taking an existing runway and repairing it, and putting a seal coat on it to make it last longer, essentially, you're just maintaining the existing pavement. There is no effect to the environment. However, when we begin to move taxiways to meet FAA standards as called for in this plan, yes, indeed, there will be a NEPA component to that will require full environmental review as to what its potential impacts are and what mitigation needs to be taken. So you're right. Federal dollars bring a NEPA statement along with it. If federal dollars are not involved, for example, we have one runway that is not eligible for federal funding for technical reasons of the nature of how that runway is configured on the airport with regard to weather conditions and winds. So when that runway is done, it's not eligible for federal funding, so therefore the federal environmental process doesn't apply, but the state's does. So although it's not subject to NEPA, that runway project will be subject to SEPA, the State Environmental Protection Act.
Okay, I have one other question. You've stated several times this evening that how much you do in runway expansion or building new hangars depends upon the completion of the Habitat Conservation Plan. What's the timeline for that? I know the Thurston County has been approved.
Yes, yeah. Yep, the Thurston County Habitat Conservation Plan is different. They went their own direction a little bit in advance. So yeah, Thurston County's is different from the one that we're working on with the city of Tumwater. So it's been a combined effort between the port and the city. We hired a consultant. That company's name is ICF. They completed their draft document after, we've been at this for about 8 years, I think, altogether, and there has been little to no development on the airport for over a decade because of the awareness of the threatened species on airport grounds. So we have a draft document now. The city of Tumwater has completed its review of that draft document. The port is in the final stages of submitting its comments back to ICF. ICF, as the engineering company or the consulting group, will then take the city's comments and the port comments and create a final draft document that will be submitted probably next month to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Once U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has that document, then they begin the environmental assessment process. That will take at least through August. Sometime in August, the public hearings will commence. And then toward sometime in the fourth quarter of this year, the public hearings will be complete, the comments will be received, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service then addresses those comments, makes any changes or makes any recommendations with regard to that final document, and then it goes to approval. Once the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approves that, which should be in the latter stage of 2023 or early 2024, it then will go back to the city of Tumwater for incorporation into the building codes. And then no development will occur until the building codes are updated to take the Habitat Conservation Plan requirements into effect. Sometime up on or about the 1st of April, sometime in the second quarter of 2024, the Habitat Conservation Plan should be done, approved, and implemented into the City of Tumwater codes. That's the timeline that we're working on today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else online, Missy? I've got one more person. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take one more online, and then I'll come back in-house.
Betsy Johnson.
Betsy, if you can hear us, you can verify that you're unmuted, and we'll take your question or comment, please. Welcome.
Yes, good evening. Thanks for taking my comment. And actually, you sort of already answered a couple questions that I had. I only heard about the expansion and the lease, the Squire land lease like 3 days ago. So I'm quite behind and maybe mentioning things that you've already discussed. And clearly, I have a lot of reading to do. But I guess I'm thinking of the airport as being a public good, and thank you for sharing the information about the different tenants that provide services for us. That was valuable information to know. And as it stands, the airport provides a lot of good services. I guess I was just also thinking about the pluses and minuses. And I know that we'll be hearing more about the Habitat Conservation Plan next month, and I will plan on attending that Zoom meeting because I think just thinking about things in the bigger scope. You know, we're in the midst of mass species extinction events. And I mean, that's something that we can, and the Mazama pocket gopher, of course, is the thing that is at risk. And it just seems like, I don't know, I just hate to think about it. I think that needs to be priority, the saving species. I don't know to what degree more development and more lighting and planes in the evening would also affect migrating. Most birds migrate at night, so that would be affected. And there's a lot of breeding amphibians that are confused by light, bright lights at nighttime as well. But I had one other question about or comment about the Squire Lands Coca-Cola bottling factory, and I'm just wondering about that they produce a product. It's basically flavored sugar water, a product that it causes a lot of public harm, and it almost feels like the economic benefit that we'd be getting from that would be outweighed by the public harms of basically an obesity epidemic that is in large part by, soda. And I know that for a fact because I'm a healthcare provider, I'm a nurse practitioner. So I think we have to think of all the pluses and minuses. And I just think, if you're going to actually lease that land, we're going to put at risk yet another threatened species. Couldn't we at least do a little bit better as far as who we're going to lease that land to than a soda bottling company? That's basically all I had to say, and thank you for taking my call.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your service to the medical field. That's important, too. And with regard to, the Swire lease, we recently received from another member of the public a request about justifying Swire's information that they presented to the Port Commission in terms of their water usage and their plastic recycling. We actually, on the port staff, have been formulating a response to that, and I'm kind of thinking we probably need to post that on our website or make it available so that people can see the work that they've done. All third-party reviews and audits of Swire's production processes show a tremendous emphasis on effective water usage, and although the bottling plant by its nature will use a significant amount of water, they invest significant dollars in water reclamation projects throughout the western U.S. where this particular part of the company functions that exceeds the value of the water that they use. And the recycling efforts have been pretty substantial. So we're mindful of that, and that was an important consideration to the Port Commission when we engaged in this lease, was their environmental awareness. And I don't know when you came on the meeting earlier, but for those of you that are online that can't see the new sign, I'll just read our new vision statement that the Port Commission just adopted in November. It says, "The Port is recognized as a trusted community institution connecting Thurston County to the world and serving as a model of environmental sustainability and economic development." That environmental sustainability is a new component of our vision, and the Port Commission believes in it, the Port staff believes in it, and that's why we are willing to engage tenants that show that and prove that to us. And Swire has thus far proven that that's how they operate and how they intend to operate, and we'll hold them to that because that's our expectation as the landlord and what we would expect of our tenants to meet that community need. So I appreciate those comments. Anybody else online, Missy? I probably should come back inside though, so let me take this one in. Yes, sir. Could you come to the microphone, please, if you don't mind, only so that those that are online can hear. Thank you.
There's been a lot of discussion about the existing airport and concerns about noise, concerns about air pollution, concerns about the environment. And you have said in regard to the noise that this is something that's really kind of out of your control. I mean, you can't, it comes, has to do with technical, the aircraft, and it's not something that you can directly control. And so doesn't it make sense that if we're having all these problems and all this concern from the community about the pollution and the noise and the environmental impacts and so on, the quality of life, it doesn't really make sense to build another airport with the same standards that we have now. Why not wait until we resolve some of these problems so that we won't just be creating more problems with another airport? And I think really that's what we should be doing, not building more airports with the same problems, but resolving the problems before we build another airport.
I think your comment is spot on. I would use the example of Denver International Airport when they realized that Stapleton could no longer meet the long-term needs of the growing Colorado community, and it wasn't a question of augmenting and building a second airport, but replacing it. And they went out and bought 52 square miles, 20 miles east of the city. And the reason why they bought so much land was not that the footprint of the airport required it, but for compatible land use guidelines to ensure an adequate buffer of both noise and environmental protection over the surrounding communities, that they could never cross inside that line to provide the noise and the pollution and the benefits that would otherwise accrue. We need to do that. That needs to be a model going forward. That was the last major new airport built in the country, and that's been operating over 26 years now. So if we're going to do something like that here, and it's a big if the political will exists to do that, then we need to follow that model to ensure that the environmental protections are in place. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Where do we, yeah, exactly. What a Herculean task. I mean, we see it coming, but how do we do it? One member of our port staff said it's a technical issue looking for a political acceptable solution, and I don't know that one exists. With the feedback that we've received from both local governments, the tribal councils, and the public. So it's a tough one, but we see the need, and then how do we address it? So, sir, your time. Your daughter yields the floor.
Oh, I would this year. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name's Craig, father of Sarah, and I'm a little confused when I came here, and I know very little bit about this, so that doesn't keep me from talking about it, however. So we have a decision that could be made about accepting commercial traffic, if I understand correctly, but an individual airplane, we don't have decisions. You have to let them land because you have a certain kind of airport that will accept those planes. Is that kind of true? But on a commercial basis, we don't have to accept if, I don't know, United decided to right now that they had a plane they wanted to land here. Would you have to accept that?
There's a nuance to that. And again, it goes back to those 39 promises of the grant assurances. Okay, as a public use airport that's accepted federal money, it's similar to, okay, the Federal Highway Administration, I assume that's the agency that built the interstate highway system or at least monitors it. It's like the federal FHA can't say, we'll take the first 209 motor vehicles that enter the highway and then we're going to fence off the rest. It's a public use highway. And by the same token, we're a public use airport. So if a commercial carrier came to us and said, we intend to start commercial service at Olympia Airport, we don't really have the right to say no, because we've accepted federal money and we've said we're a free and open market, so it would be up to the marketplace to make that decision. We don't see that as feasible. That's the purpose of this feasibility test, is we don't see the business case for that. But if somebody came to us and wanted to start commercial service and engage in a lease and provide the revenue and build the buildings to go ahead and commence that service, then the port would be obligated to allow that to happen.
Okay, and that would be true usually when we think about this, or for me that still likes to fly, or even in a small airplane for those $100 hamburgers. It could also be for cargo. And then the same thing would apply, because that seems a lot more reasonable to me. I always think about it as passenger,
right,
which seems kind of limited, but flying in cargo and using some space and being close to the freeway seems like a lot more possible. And then it also seems to me that the timing of all that is more like Sarah suggests. It's going to be flying overhead at night, and as big aircraft or the kind of aircraft that could land here. But so I've got all that pretty much straight in my mind.
Exactly. And what we can do is look to examples for that. So as the type of cargo operation, we don't have cargo operations here now at all. But one that does exist that I can point to as an example is FedEx operates a carrier in a Caravan. It's a single engine aircraft that would hold up to 10 people normally, but it's been reconfigured for cargo. It operates from Boeing Field to Port Angeles to Bremerton to Boeing Field. And all it does is pick up small packages and envelopes. And it leaves Boeing Field about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It runs 4 days a week, goes to Port Angeles, stops, unloads, picks up a few, comes down to Bremerton, spends a half hour on the ground, and goes back to Boeing Field. It's off the ground by 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night from Bremerton and goes back to Boeing Field, so that it can be then unloaded and all the packages then transferred to the jets that are then heading to Memphis, Tennessee. So that's how that works. I would think that if there was a market here for something like that, that would occur. But it's not a nighttime operation, because they've got to get, the type of operation that would serve this community would be very similar to that. And they have to get back up to Boeing Field to go ahead and connect with those other carriers, at a reasonable time of the evening to go ahead and make that transfer.
So the kind of plane that could fill if there were a local warehouse or something, to get the thing that my wife orders against my daughter's advice that comes from Florida and gets here in the morning. Mm-hmm. A plane that distributes out of Memphis or wherever, that carrying larger cargo, we simply don't have a runway to accept
We don't have the runway. At 5,500 feet long, and again, having come from that world in another part of my professional life, we don't have the runway that would take care of that.
Yeah.
We just don't. We're only 5,500 feet long. We could operate, in an executive jet type thing or a smaller jet, similar to what Bremerton does with the Caravans, for that kind of cargo operation. But in terms of a Prime Air 737 coming here to service the Amazon last mile facility, no, this airport cannot accommodate an aircraft of that sort.
So only one more observation, and it goes to your other hat, if you can kind of turn that around mentally. I'm thinking about, you have to plan a new airport, you have to plan, 30, 40 years out, something like that, but that's what we're trying to guess at. And it seems to me when we look at even the economic growth advantages, which I won't live long enough to see, but they're mitigated a whole lot. We can see that if we look at the fires and in the stuff that's happening in our environment and everything that's happened noticeable over the last 15 years or so. And it seems to me when we look 40 years out, and it's a different mandate that you would have looking for an airport site, but we need to be planning on how not to have that airport, not on how to have that airport. We have to find far more efficient ways, particularly to move cargo. And maybe we have to get used to not having it show up on our doorstep in the morning. Those are all social things that we can do, but I do think, and I'm actually encouraged when you talk about the people that are in your group, thinking about what we have to do, but that for sort of planning that far out, really need, I'm reminded of San Francisco, and when I was in Vietnam, my wife was living in San Francisco. She had a better tour, but at that time, they actually stopped as I understand it, they stopped building a bridge, and they stopped building parking in San Francisco to force people to get onto public transportation that they were building, and need that sort of change, which was very different in 1970 than the way people were thinking, but it wasn't looking back and extrapolating. It was envisioning and trying to figure out what you have to do to move there. And so anyway, I'd encourage that with the other hat.
I appreciate that. It does have to be a very creative process. There's no question about it. Yes, ma'am.
A couple things that I'm getting conflicting information about. I had understood that you said that there would be a SEPA for the airport master plan update.
A planning SEPA document. It's not an individual SEPA by project. It's going to be an overall SEPA environmental checklist that just basically lays out the general requirements that would have to be addressed as each project is executed. As each project is executed, there could be both a NEPA and/or a SEPA requirement associated with it as those projects come to fruition.
I received today a response from Leah Whitfield saying that there would be no SEPA and no NEPA as a part of the master plan update process.
Okay, by definition, there is not, and this is a conversation we haven't yet had with the aviation planning group doing this master plan update. There is not a requirement to do a SEPA planning checklist. Now, there may be differences of opinion, but depending upon, again, who you talk to in the source document and the requirements. But typically in Washington State, my own personal experience with all the master plans I've been involved in other locations, a SEPA planning checklist has not been done, that it is deferred till the project execution stage. However, we, the Port of Bremerton, did do a SEPA planning checklist in the 2013 master plan, and as we were discussing this among the staff, as we are reaching the end game and approaching the point of doing the FAA, we will internally be doing a SEPA checklist, even if it's not required by the letter of law. We think that we've heard enough from the community that we think that's an important step to take, and we will undertake that. But it's not a discussion that I have yet had with Leah directly or with our consulting engineers. So,
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
yes, absolutely.
Another thing, you mentioned that Thurston County had requested the feasibility, commercial aviation feasibility study, and also that, it would be something that Thurston County residents could be using to fly commercially, but in the past, when
Can
there
I
has been...
clarify a question? Did you say that Thurston County was requesting a feasibility?
That's what I understood you said. That's not true?
No.
Who wanted the feasibility study?
We the port, were looking at what should we include when we were scoping the master plan. We looked at where are we as an airport, as a community, the economic development capability. We have the only public use airport in Thurston County with paved runways. There are only 3 public use airports in the county. The other 2 are short grass runways, believe it or not. So we are it. And I get literally a phone call about every week to 10 days going, how do I catch commercial service from Olympia Airport to Walla Walla or Salem or Missoula or Tri-Cities? And they're surprised when I tell them we don't offer commercial service. Vision 2050, which was a community-based effort that the Commission has approved and accepted, asks that commercial service be implemented at Olympia Regional Airport. So as a result of Vision 2050, as the port has looked at the industry growth and development, the population growth, by the way, Thurston County is going to grow 25% between now and 2040, according to estimates from TRPC, the Thurston Regional Planning Council. And our airport is only going to grow at 40% that rate. So the population is outpacing, by the way, the growth of Olympia Regional Airport. I think that's important to note. But in any case, the port looked at this information and then said we should ask the FAA if they would sponsor a commercial feasibility check. So that came from the port, not from the county.
I don't believe that the port's request for that reflected what the community would want, and I think that that could only be determined by a vote of the people. If there were commercial aviation at the Olympia Airport, it wouldn't just be Thurston County people that would be flying over our heads. It would be people from possibly 5 counties converging on the Olympia Airport and flying over our communities. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
You also mentioned that there's a shrinkage of one-way runway, which is the 826 runway, I
Very good,
believe.
yes, runway 826, that's correct.
That runway used to be the noise mitigation runway. It was used to help protect people who lived in Olympia, particularly north of the airport, so that they weren't getting the bulk of airport traffic going back and forth. It also protected Miller Sylvania Park and some of the wildlife refuges to the south. So in shortening and shrinking that runway, that is actually increasing impact on Olympia, where I live, Southeast Olympia, Watershed Park, Olympia High School, those areas, as well as south of the airport. Just wanted to mention that.
If I may, I would just disagree, because the length that we're shortening it to, all the aircraft that currently use that runway, the general aviation types that are closely located to that runway, all of those aircraft will be able to continue to use that same exact runway. So I do not see a decrease in operational use of that runway whatsoever. But by reducing its length, we improve the environment on the airport, and we reduce the cost to the port of maintaining a secondary runway.
As I look at the flight app, I'm not seeing a lot of airplanes using that runway. Most of them are using the main north-south runway.
Well, there's no question that the vast majority of traffic does use runway 1735, which is our longer primary runway, but a fair amount of general aviation traffic does use runway 826.
And my last comment has to do with economic benefit. And I'm thinking of a report that was addressing community health concerns around SeaTac Airport, and was written by Washington State Public Health. And they were speaking about environmental justice and pointed out that one aspect of environmental justice is the principle that one group of people should not be able to derive economic benefit at the expense of another group of people. And that is what is happening when you speak of economic benefits to businesses at the airport. It is at the expense of other people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to talk about Swire for a minute, because the description that you were giving of Swire doesn't match up very well with what Coca-Cola's reputation is.
If I may, Coca-Cola and Swire are two different companies. So
is it not going to be Coca-Cola bottled at the...
it is a franchise company with its own independent leadership and track record that is separate from Coca-Cola. It just has the franchise to produce Coca-Cola products, but it is a completely different company. So we can't make any inferences with regard to Coca-Cola's reputation or operations anywhere in the world with regard to Swire. It's two different companies. They just have the contract to produce the products for Coca-Cola.
That strikes me as sort of splitting hairs, because when you have a company that's producing something for another company, they're intricately bound to each other, and one's corporate policies impact the other's corporate policies.
Plastic is plastic, no matter.
Okay. Is there a particular question, or is it just...
I mean, so Coca-Cola's reputation is as the worst for 4 years in a row, worst polluting environmental company in the world. They have drawn down the aquifers of various third world countries and then left them polluted. So, you know, you're putting your faith that Swire is going to operate differently, but that's who they're serving, is Coca-Cola.
Well, that's why I wanted to draw a distinction between the two companies, because the Swire track record is different, And the City of Tumwater came to the Port Commission meeting and testified to the Port Commission that the water resources that Swire will use are accounted for in their growth and development plan within the city, so it will have no impact on the aquifer or the water demands that were already included in the infrastructure planning for the city. So the environmental research that the port staff has done and the work that Swire has done, all verified by third-party independent contractors, indicate to us at the port that this is a tenant who walks the talk. And we'll hold them to that, but that's all the information that we have right now, and that's why I wanted to make sure that there's a clear distinction. Even though it is the same product line, it is a different company that manages to a different standard, and that's what we've seen, that's what the evidence shows, and that's a part of the research in the paper that the port staff is in the process of putting together right now, based upon feedback from other members of the community.
I know that Tumwater has testified that they had this in their water budget, and I don't think that Tumwater plans out 75 years. And so one of the things that concerns me about their making a contract to export our local water, because that's really what's happening, is we're exporting our water, is we're headed into climate change where we are expecting drought and water shortages, and we're obligating our water for 75 years. So that seems very problematic to me.
Okay, well, the City of Tumwater has verified that. They've done the research. They're responsible for doing the planning, and we would have no reason to doubt the accuracy of their work or of their forecasting ability to provide the needs for the community.
Right, so I will talk to them about whether they've really thought that out 75 years.
Yeah, totally.
So then there's the part about the habitat conservation plan. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife had said to you that that particular corner of the airport was critical habitat for the gophers and needed to be protected as critical habitat. And so I'm particularly puzzled about why that's the corner that Swire is being put on. And I'm also puzzled about how the habitat conservation plan is not finished yet, but the contract is. So if the plan comes back saying, yeah, no, you really can't do that because of the gophers, but then you have this contract with Swire, I don't understand how that adds up.
So a couple of pieces to that. So the first one with regard to the habitat is to verify that that is in fact the case. And part of the mitigation plan will be to define the level of habitat that exists, not just for the gopher, but also the streaked horned lark and the spotted frog. So we've got 3 different species involved, and all that will be taken into account with the land. So the end result is, in terms of why that particular location anywhere within New Market Industrial Center or on the airport, was because of it was the least obtrusive location for the future development of the airport. Especially if this commercial feasibility ever takes off, then we reserve the west side over closer to Tumwater Boulevard, closer to the I-5 corridor, which then provides better protection for the residential neighborhoods to the southeast of the airport. So that was that intention. The other thing is it met their requirements for access to 93rd to get to the I-5 corridor. So the mitigation aspect is there, but in terms of the timing of the contract with regard to the mitigation is, I mentioned earlier, there were 2 requirements that have to be met before Swire can turn 1 shovel of dirt. And one is the Habitat Conservation Plan, and the other one is FAA approval of that type of use on that property. In the meantime, by having a contract, Swire is now paying us $167,000 a year for the right to protect that option with nothing. So that, to us, looks like a good business decision to go ahead and generate revenue with nothing happening to protect that option, and that option cannot be executed until the other requirements are met satisfactorily.
So if the habitat plan comes back saying, no, Swire, you really can't do this there, then they just...
Then the lease will then be subject to termination.
Well,
or relocation.
congratulations, you've gotten them to pay you a lot of money that they will never be able to build on. Amazing.
We try to be good shepherds, we truly do. You know, it's, you know, we look at the possibilities, we plan for the downside. We've got a great team here that I hope the community,
That seems to me like getting them to do something that they will fail at. I mean, it doesn't seem like anyway.
yeah,
Right,
we
thank
don't
you
do
for
it to fail.
explaining that.
They came to the South Puget Sound about a year and a half ago, and I know there were some questions that may have come up in terms of how quickly this lease was done, that it was, I think, one comment I think I heard at the commission meeting was less than 75 days. So I went back to the source, you know, again, this precedes my time here at the Port of Olympia, but Swire began doing its research in South Puget Sound in Thurston County in mid-2021. The first meeting between port staff and Swire was on February 8th of 2022. So this was almost a year in the making, you know, when it really got down to location.
Yes, I know you guys knew for a long time. The public didn't. That was why you were hearing.
And that was by request of the tenant. And we do try to honor that, but again,
So where's the accountability to the public then?
but the accountability of the public is we have a lease where we have to prove obligation. In the meantime, we're generating revenue for the port without turning a single shovel of dirt. That, to me, is a win-win deal, and especially if we can bring the jobs and the economic impact that come with that tenant, with the proper mitigations in place for habitat, then we have done a good thing for the port. Again, the environmental sustainability piece and the economic development. That's what we as a port hang our hats on.
Okay, I'm going to let her.
Okay, well, it is getting a little bit late. And let me introduce Executive Director Sam Gibney is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you to everybody here, and particularly those that were here earlier and have lasted this long. I want to assure you this won't be the last time that you'll have to interact with us. Yeah, it's exactly. I thank you so much for your thoughtful engagement on this. I've really appreciated the tenor and thoughtfulness of your questions and your probing. We really do try to honor the ability for people to have a diversity of opinion, and I would very much like to thank Warren and you are I think the penultimate in public service. You've really been thoughtful in your replies, and also, recognizing that there are impacts from what the port operations are and what we do and what the airport is. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Leah, for being on the phone. Thank you, Missy, for saying yet another late night. And so, but with that, as Warren's boss, I do, and I'm sorry, I don't know this gentleman.
Darren Murata.
Hi, Darren. Thank you. And I'm just being a little bit of a mother hen in that Warren has had some late nights already this week. And again, this won't be the last opportunity that you'll have to interact with us. We will be following up with more information on our website. There's been some really helpful feedback in here of how we can continue to improve our transparency as we move along. It's always a work in progress. We take that very seriously, and Warren is exceptional in his follow-up, and I think you can expect to see things on the website and yet more information coming out. So thank you for attending, and with that, I would like to draw the evening to a close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. My only question is, are you glad we did this, and should we do it again sometime? Yes. Okay, all right. I agree. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Drive home safely.